This meeting of the Arizona Independent Redistricting Commission will now come to order. The time is 1:35 p.m. It's Wednesday, August 3rd, and let's start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Please rise.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Great, it's good to see so many of you here today at our meeting. I'm going to start with roll call first. Vice Chair Freeman.
Here.
Vice Chair Herrera.
Here.
Commissioner McNulty.
Here.
Commissioner Sturts.
Here.
We have a quorum. I'd like to also acknowledge other folks here at the dais. Our legal counsel, we have Joe Canefield and Mary O'Grady. We have our mapping consultant, Corinne, you'll have to help me, Belak, and Ken Strasma. And our executive director, Ray Bladine, is going to be here shortly. We also have Buck Forrest, who's our chief technology officer, our public information officer, Stuart Robinson, and our deputy executive director, Christina Gomez. And Anna Garcia is also on our staff in the back. Thank you, Anna. And so if any of you have questions for staff, feel free to address them throughout the meeting. Our next agenda item is the executive director report, but we'll go ahead and move on to the next item since Mr. Bladine would need to give that report for us, and he'll be here momentarily. So that takes us to agenda item 3, presentation by Strategic Telemetry, discussion and possible action on the purchase of online mapping software. So if you all are ready to go, if you could.
Certainly.
Great.
So we brought up at the last meeting, there have been 3 different companies that have provided bids for online redistricting software. I do want to clarify, because there were some public comments raised at the hearings about the distinction between this and the existing ARC website. The ARC website already has the ability to host maps, pictures of maps. We will be able to put images up, what's called block equivalency files, so anyone who wants to grab copies of draft maps can pull them down, and we'll also be able to post them in native Maptitude and ESRI shape files. What's distinct from the online mapping software is that's something that actually gives citizens the ability to go online, anyone who has access to a web browser, and draw their own maps. In many states in past redistrictings, there have been different types of public outreach that have been tried. For example, having computer terminals installed at public libraries, traveling public access terminals. Sometimes, when I was doing this 20 years ago, we would have big paper map books, and people would write the numbers of census blocks on a piece of paper to submit them. So the technology has come quite far, and that now there's ability that anyone who has access to a web browser can log in, draw maps, experiment with changes to different maps, submit them if they want to the commission. The 3 different bids that we've received are from ESRI, Maptitude, and Avezia. ESRI is the makers of the ArcView GIS package, probably the most commonly used commercial GIS package. They have submitted a bid that would be $116,000. Maptitude is from Caliper Corporation. They are the makers of the online, of the desktop software that the commission selected at the last meeting. So do have the advantage of the familiar user interface to people who've used, in Arizona, who've used Maptitude over the last 10 years. They've submitted a bid at $87,000 for online access for a year. The third company, Avezia, provided the software that was used for the Arizona Competitive Districts Coalition's online mapping contest that many people are familiar with. And they have submitted a bid that would essentially allow the commission to take over the remainder of that contract and use the same software that people who were participating in that contest are familiar with. And they submitted a bid at $49,651.
And do you know how much time is left on that contract?
I do not.
Okay. Maybe we can find that out. What other questions or comments do you all have on online mapping software? Commissioner
I
McMillan?
do have a question about the ease of use of the three alternatives for the public, and which, would be most likely to provide a tool that an unexperienced user could take advantage of.
There's a bit of a learning curve for any of the three. If someone has used one of them before, so if people have done the online contest before and are familiar with it, that's an advantage. If people are familiar with Maptitude, that's an advantage. For all of them, there is training available, and I would suggest doing a web-based video training that people could actually see how it's done online rather than having to read through a manual. So that they would all take some training, and I think we would have to make an effort to make them as accessible as possible. I don't see any one of them being above the others in terms of usability.
In terms of our ability to understand what's provided to us versus the users' ability, the fact that many of the users who are really involved in this process already would have used the Azavia, is that what we're calling it? Azavia. I mean, we're going to be using Maptitude. Is it going to be fairly easy for us to understand what the Azavia product is when it's provided to us?
Yes, we'll make sure that that's seamless, Commissioner.
Okay.
Seamless, Commissioner.
Okay.
We will transfer any, if one of the other packages is submitted, we will translate them into Maptitude and make them available on the desktop package that the commissioners are using.
So it sounds like there wouldn't be a good reason to spend more than $47,000 or $49,000 for the Azavia package, that should provide the same bundle of sticks for the public, and that we would be able, through you to translate it to what we're doing.
I do believe that all three packages provide a similar level of functionality.
Madam Chair?
Mr. Sturts?
Ken, thank you for getting these proposals pulled together. When did we get these proposals?
They've come in over the course of the last week.
I'm a bit at a loss because other than Maptitude, the S3 and the Azavia software are neither of those two I've had the opportunity to look at. So other than taking a recommendation from Mr. Strassma and looking at the financial components of this, I wouldn't have a comment at this time. It would have been preferred if we would have had an opportunity to at least know that of who the companies were and what the software that we were anticipating taking action on today. Because it was, the hope is to get this out into the public as quickly as possible so that they can start doing their work post-grid map design decision. So with that being said, I'm for lack of information, I don't know how I could possibly make a recommendation or a decision based on what's been delivered today. Is there anything else that you have? Is there a presentation comparison between the three?
We made a conscious decision not to forward the proposals because one of the three had included a request that it not be made public to anyone who was not involved in the decision-making process. What we can do is go back to them and say, is there a proposal that you are willing to have made a public document, and then make all three of those available to the Commission and the public.
Okay.
Other questions or comments from other commissioners?
Madam Chair.
Mr. Freeman?
I think I'm in the same boat as Commissioner Sturts. I feel like I'm being given some names and some numbers and just asked to decide, and the decision may be an easy one or not. I don't know without a little more information. I played with the online, well, I went through the initial training for the one on azdistricting.com, but I have not had the opportunity to use either of the other two options we have, so I don't know.
Okay. Well, I would agree. I mean, I don't know either. I'm not familiar with those particular packages. So it would be helpful, I think, Mr. Strassma, if you could come back to us, if you could find out, first of all, if that one company will even allow us to all look at it, because if they won't, that'll make the decision between two. And then if you could maybe just put together the pros and cons of them, and also now that we know the names of the companies, we also can be looking into them ourselves and seeing what we can find out too. But to the extent you can provide any information on those particular offerings, that would be great.
Okay. Certainly, Madam Chair, we'll check with the company and ask them to submit something they're willing to share, and also circulate those to the commissioners, and also links to sites that are currently up and running using the 3 different packages.
Right, and to also find out how much contract time is left with that one
We'll do that as well.
package.
Madam Chair, could
Mr.
you,
Sturts?
could you elaborate on that question that you've asked? When you've asked a question about how much time is left on an existing contract, I'm not sure what that means.
Well, he had mentioned at the beginning when he was articulating the 3 packages that the Avasia one, which is the online redistricting software package that I believe the Competitive Districts Coalition is using, he said that we could take over the remainder of the contract for $49,000, and I was just wondering how much time's left.
Okay. And the other question that I've got for you, Mr. Strassman, is that you had mentioned that that currently we have the ability to post maps on our AIRC website.
Yes, and that's, for example, the maps from the last cycle are currently up on the website in JPEG format, and there's also the opportunity to download those in what's called shapefiles. And I anticipate being able to do that with the maps for this decade's process as well without any problem.
Madam Chair, Ken, when were those posted?
They have been up as long as I've been working with the site the last several months. These are maps from the last.
They're in the 2001 to 2010
right.
link.
Yes.
Where is any of the current data located? There's nothing going forward, correct? You've got nothing.
Correct.
You've got nothing that's been currently submitted in any of the public hearings that we've had?
That's correct.
Okay. And also, is the questionnaire that we keep referring to at our public hearings, is that available on our website?
I believe so. Let me defer to the executive director on that. Oh, it's up.
I don't believe we have been telling people that, but when I checked the other day, because we had a problem in getting you could fill them out and submit, the form is either on there but not submittable, or it's not on there. And I'm going to turn to Buck and see if be ready today or tomorrow.
Okay.
Okay.
And Madam Chair, just on that point, we've had a number of people submit maps at these public comment hearings so far. Can we get those up on our website as well so other members of the public can see what's being submitted?
Yes.
Shall I go ahead? We are scanning those maps as quickly as we can along with the other dialogue, and the intention would be to put the maps up on the website, but right now we're behind in scanning.
Great.
Mr. Bladine, are we going to indicate the source of the map as we're posting them?
I would think that's a good idea, so yes, we will.
And the date?
And the date, and from where. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions on this online mapping software decision?
I do have one more question. Once we make a decision, how long will it take to get the package up so it's available to the public?
Approximately 2 weeks.
Okay. Other questions?
Madam Chair?
Mr. Sturts?
Mr. Strassman, when will the commissioners be in receipt of these proposals so that we can review and start drilling down on any other questions that we may have, and who will we be directing the questions through to be able to get answers? Are you administering the contract, or is Mr. Bladine?
Mr. Bladine would. It would not go through strategic telemetry. And in terms of timing, it depends on the response from the other company. I would offer getting the information out Friday and letting them know, let us know one way or another if you want to be included in what's submitted Friday.
Which is the company that's not?
It's ESRI.
Okay. So we've got information on Maptitude, and obviously that's a public access on azredistricting.com for that usability, correct?
Correct.
All right. Terrific, thanks.
Okay. Other questions, comments before we move on?
Madam Chair.
Mr. Freeman?
It probably goes without saying, but obviously I want to make the right decision on this. and the appropriate decision, but time is of the essence. If it's going to be a 2-week lead time, in that time, I anticipate the commission is going to be moving forward on the grid map and then moving to develop a draft map, and I don't want the public to not have this capability with very little time to really do and submit anything to the commission before we're already at the draft map stage. Because my concern is once the commission is at the draft map stage, we now present the public with a presumption that they have to overcome, that they've always seen the direction the commission is moving in, and now they have to persuade us to move away from that presumption. I know it's within the prerogative of the commission to make any changes it wants down the road, but it might seem a little more daunting to members of the public. Right now, they're working with a blank slate. The commission hasn't tipped its hand or hasn't drawn any maps, and I think from a public's perspective, I would think that they view the playing field as level at this point. So that's a long way of saying I think we need to make the right decision, but we need to make it as quickly as possible.
I was going to ask, what do you propose? I agree completely, and to the extent, and we're going to get to future meeting dates as part of this agenda, and it may be that we'll need to meet via telephone or something to at least make some decisions at a meeting that is coming up faster than maybe we had thought we were going to before. So, and at least a telephonic one can be, we can mobilize quickly if we need to. So we'll look forward to getting the information from Mr. Strasma on these options, and then decide maybe Friday we can start to review that material that he gives us, and then proceed accordingly. And hopefully we can all review it quickly and decide what we want to do in our own minds and come together and discuss that at a future meeting, hopefully soon.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Mr. Sturts.
Am I under the impression from the rest of the commissioners that Maptitude was discussed at the prior hearing as the preferred online mapping service because of its relationship with, one, what's happened over the previous 10 years and what we're using as our own mapping software? And that Avasia came in as a after discussion opportunity for cost savings and for knowledge of the general public who's been using that software.
My recollection was that we talked about Maptitude for the desktop version, but I didn't think we necessarily talked about it for online mapping. I could be incorrect with that if you guys remember differently. But I know that we have discussed the azredistricting.com as another option out there, but I don't remember specifically covering Maptitude for online mapping.
As Madam Chair, as everybody knows, I'm a big fan of saving the taxpayers as much money as possible. So the more quickly we can make this decision, the better the public's going to be, and the faster we can get them drawing maps at their own time frame and their own discretion. So
I agree.
So let's table this. Will we need a motion to table this item to the next hearing?
Or we can agree to have it on our next agenda, this decision.
Move it to the next agenda.
Okay. So that, any other comments? Okay, and we are, so it's not specifically noticed on our agenda. We have public comment will be allowed regarding the options prior to the commission's actions, but that's for agenda item 4 and not 3. So I'm not sure how that, we have a request, legal counsel, for a comment with regard to agenda item 3. And I'm happy to entertain it if we're allowed to, but otherwise.
Yes, Madam Chair, you have the discretion to take things not in the order listed, and there is public comment at the end for any matter, and so you can hear public comment on a specific agenda item now. If you
right now,
wish.
Great. Okay, then that said, I'd like to go ahead and ask David Cantelmi from Fair Trust in Phoenix to come up and comment on agenda item 3.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, members of the Commission. There is a fundamental principle in public procurement law that all bidders be treated equally. In effect, what you have is a subsidy to Avisia, if I pronounced that correctly. I can't. I'm just repeating what I heard here. As I understand it, there's 3 competitors, Avisia, Maptitude, and ESRI. And the proposal for Avisia is that the commission would take over its contract and thereby would enjoy a savings, would only have to pay, as I heard it, $49,000, which is less, of course, than the other 2 bidders. The problem with that is that, in effect, it is a subsidy by the coalition to the commission to purchase this particular software. And while it's great to enjoy savings with public dollars, to do that would mistreat Maptitude and ESRI, unless the same subsidy was extended to them so that they be placed on an equal footing. Members of the commission, you cannot favor one public bidder over another. You cannot extend one privilege to one public bidder not enjoyed by the other, even if it would result in a savings, because that would violate the fundamental principle of equal footing and equal treatment. Nor, members of the commission, can you take into consideration, for purposes of your decision, the fact that certain portions of the public have been using that particular software. And the reason for that, commissioners, is that the 2 competitors were not allowed the same access to the public. As a result, you've got a privilege or favor being enjoyed by one of the competitors, in my opinion, not enjoyed by the other 2, and you just can't do that. Unless there's questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments on agenda item 3 that anyone would want to? We'll need you to fill out a request to speak form. Oh, great, you did? Do we?
Specify agenda 3 because I didn't know this situation was going to come up.
Okay, sure. Can you tell me your name?
Wendy Shops.
Wendy Shops. Pull you out. Okay, Wendy Shops, representing Self from Phoenix.
Thank you. I wanted to first say that Xavier's client is a far-left progressive company, Arizona Competitive Districts Coalition, and taking over a contract from a progressive liberal group is a corrupt and conflict of interest. We want to know, the public wants to know, not only the bids that are coming in regarding these companies, but if any of these companies have any particular party affiliation. I think the public also has a right to know when making that decision. That's it for agenda 3 right now.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair,
Yes,
I think you have somebody raising their hand.
I'm sorry.
Ken Clark is raising his hand. I'm sure you'd like to speak.
Oh, yes. I didn't specify. Mr. Clark. Okay, but you're in here as well? Just a second. I got you, okay. Ken Clark, Arizona Competitive Districts Coalition from Phoenix, and he's talking on agenda item 3 as well.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Commissioners. There are a couple of points that are somewhat alarming. First, that somehow by turning over the rest of the contract that the Arizona Competitive Districts Coalition had with Xavia, it's giving a preference. I don't understand how you can make that jump. A preference in what? We began a process, we developed this tool, and we are willing to turn it over for the cost that Xavia has decided on their own it would cost to move that tool over and upgrade it. The fact that we were already doing this in the state and the fact that other people were using it is no more an advantage to anybody else than if Maptitude had taken the time to look at our little state and come on over and pay attention to it, which clearly it did not. The idea, furthermore, that we are some kind of far-left progressive group, my co-chair, Roberta Voss, a Republican, would contest that idea. It's simply not true. We had a mapping contest that just culminated the other day, or yesterday, and we had the awards, and people were allowed to map with whatever they had in mind. We obviously would like to see greater competition, but anybody can use this tool for any purpose. And the beauty of it is that you have transparency and you can scrutinize anybody's maps that come forward. It's simply not true. Furthermore, one final point, in turning the software over to the commission, whatever assumptions that we built into the software regarding what is a competitive district, what is a compact district, would then be redefined based on the assumptions that the commission wants to do. So even if we were a bunch of Maoists, it wouldn't matter. Or whatever we are on this political spectrum, because the commission uses the neutral tool to redefine and use the definitions that the commission's going to use so that it matches.
Please.
Sorry.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Clark.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Mr. Herrera.
Yeah, I want to make sure that that we don't, you know, I'm not familiar, I mean, I've heard of the 3 mapping consultants. I guess I never thought of the political leanings of these mapping tools, and I didn't take that into consideration, and I really frankly don't care. If it's whatever the best tool we can purchase and save the taxpayer money, that's my priority. If it happens to be Vasia, am I pronouncing it correctly? Then so be it. So to me, it's is it the right tool, and is it for the right price? I also want to make a recommendation. I know plenty of people that participated in the contest that Mr. Ken Clark was referring to, Republicans, Independents, Green Party, Libertarians, and I think they got a wide range of people from different political views participating, and I would recommend that we consider I think there was a press conference yesterday where they announced the winners, or at least the top 2, and for us to at least consider looking at their maps, because I think that would, members of the public, they participated in a fair contest, and I would recommend that we, at a minimum, as a commission, review their maps as well.
Okay, thank you. We have another, sir, have you filled out a request to speak form? Okay, and your name is? Yep. If you could come to the podium. Gene Deal, representing Sons of Liberty Riders from Maricopa County, on agenda item 3.
I'd like to state for the record that in the business world, if this same type of transaction were attempted, it would be considered fraud and malfeasance. So to do it in the public forum with the public funding is bordering on the same thing. Contempt? Yes. Illegal? Yes. They became an interested party when they signed a contract with that coalition. So to, quote, use the excuse of savings for the public, they've already become they've already become an interested party in these proceedings when they signed a contract with the other organization. So to use that, quote, savings for the public, it's a misnomer at best. Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, can we move forward from this conversation with, we have a area for members of the public to speak, and I'd recommend that we keep going with our agenda.
Yeah, we will.
I think we have a long day ahead of us, and I'd prefer we do that.
We will. Ms. O'Grady?
And Madam Chair, I thought it might be appropriate for Joe and I to just follow up to make, in terms of whether this is a viable thing to even consider at this point in light of the concerns that have been expressed.
Great. Thank you. So you'll let us know whether that's even a viable option for us.
I think that makes sense.
Great.
Okay.
Chair.
Okay. Thank you. Any other members of the public on agenda item 3? Okay. Hearing none and seeing none, we'll move on. So we'll go back now, I think, to agenda item 2, Executive Director Report, Mr. Ray Bladine.
Of course.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I apologize for being late. I would not want to accept responsibility myself. I'm going to blame it on Christian Palmer. because he called me when I was driving into the garage and surprised me, and I couldn't remember where I parked my car. So I've been running around going like this trying to find my car for the last 20 minutes. And I hate to admit that, being the age I am, because it just confirms what people sometimes think. So with that, I do sincerely apologize, and I will now proceed with our report. I just wanted to update everyone on public information requests. We do, just so you all know, we do daily have contact with the press asking for a document or a document or two. If we can provide those documents to them, we go ahead and just do that. Figuring they are public documents, if they're available, we should make them available as soon as possible. In terms of formal requests, the ones that I am aware of that are currently outstanding is a request from Senator Andy Biggs about all documents related to the strategic telemetry contract. We are in the process of pulling that together. I met with Mary yesterday and saw a stack of data like this that we're still going through, and we're doing it as rapidly as we can, but my instruction to staff has been that we've got to do these public hearings and then as quickly as possible provide the information. So in fact, we've had the staff from Mary's firm going through some of my emails because I've been out of town so much that I haven't been able to do that. The second one I'm aware of is Christian Palmer's request for procurement files and documents, and all documents held by commissioners, and that's pretty much done except for some very last information that we need to provide him in terms of commissioner notes. But I did review the procurement file with him, and he made copies of the documents that he wished to have copies of. Representative Terry Proud requested all of the documents that others requested, so as we're going through and getting the documents together, we are making a copy for her. And then I would just tell, historically, there have been a number of requests. If they're in writing, we try to send them out as a part of the packet that we were trying to do weekly of information that has come into the commission. As you know, recently we've gotten behind in that, and I apologize because some of that information just hasn't gone out to you in terms of public information. But I'll start to make sure that if I have a written request, I'll pull it out and forward it to you under separate cover. So I guess in summary, we have two requests. We really are working on one that's rather large. We're making progress. I can't give you an estimate right now when we'll have it done, but we are putting the resources we can on that. The second item, we have heard a lot of information about what our budget is, so I thought I'd correct it for the record. We had $500,000 for last fiscal year, and we're allowed to carry over the balance to this fiscal year, for which there was an appropriation of $3 million. So the total amount we have for the 2 years is $3.5 million. We've heard people claim that we have $10 million. That's not true. Looking at the documents that were submitted, the Department of Administration requested $10 million, but we didn't get $10 million. Last year, or 10 years ago, there was an appropriation of about $6 million at this period of time, and that went up as there was lawsuits. So I would be, if we have lawsuits, obviously our budget will go up, but it looks like we're fairly comparable to what the other commission was 10 years ago in terms of appropriation, and again, that is $3.5 million. First round public hearings, as you probably all recall that when we brought the item of first round public hearings to you, we basically said, why don't you let us get started, set up these meetings. We probably won't be able to achieve all the cities exactly as we laid out because of scheduling and other issues. We also indicated that the schedule was open, and if people would like to submit additional locations, they could do that and we would try to accommodate. Unfortunately, I missed a memo from Commissioner Freeman where he had laid out some very specific locations, and we did not go back, we did not add those to first round hearings, and I did correspond back to him to let him know that we would work those out with him as we could. At this point, we're close to the end of the first round hearings. I would tell you that from what I've seen, I thought they have gone very well, except for an exception, particularly in Flagstaff this weekend, where I messed up in not confirming who was being there. And I must say that the community was most gracious with us. They proceeded with testimony. They gave us some good information in terms of what they would like to see for mapping. And it's certainly my impression from having talked to people involved 10 years ago that the type and the quality of information we're getting at these public hearings is much more useful than it was in the past, that we are getting specific concerns of areas like the Bullhead City area and Yuma area, talking about a river district, specific discussions of how the Flagstaff area should look, and from Native American communities. Does that mean we have all the information? Of course not. If we want to add additional to round one, we could certainly do that, but I would not recommend that you hold off continuing with your mapping until that's done. There is a round two, and most of the professionals that I have talked to, of which are two, would indicate the most important type of input is once you have a map up there. And in fact, when NDC's Doug Johnson was in town, we specifically asked him about that, and his comment was, the first round is good, it gets people's attention, it gives commission information. The second round is where you really give people the opportunity to be specific. So my recommendation would be you could add additional areas in the second round that we missed. However, that's your decision to make. But I do believe that the process we've gone upon has maximized the public input into the mapping process. And I think that with the information and that you have now, you probably all are starting to formulate direction that you'll want to give to the mapping consultant in the terms of concepts that you would like to see them come back on. So this week we'll end the hearings that we have scheduled for the first round. There has been some concern that some meetings got shifted. All of those were really the result of facility or date changes to accommodate areas. For example, we thought that we would do Glendale as one of the first hearings. They asked that we be held later because they were doing their own redistricting. We had some contact with the town of Eager, and at the time we had the contact, they had a lot of issues related to the fire and did not think that was a good time for us to come up there. I personally talked to the mayor and indicated we would put her on the second schedule when I talked to her, and she called me because she wondered why we weren't there, and I don't think realized some of the Eager staff had said, gee, right now we're just tied up in the fire. So we've tried to accommodate other agencies as best we can. Bullhead City, we went there instead of Havasu because Havasu had a council meeting in that week. Bullhead City had a better facility. They indicated to us, and it proved to be true, that Havasu, Bullhead City, and Kingman all worked together. In fact, the two mayors were there, and a representative from a statement from the Havasu. So we got very good input in that area. The facility was very good. They were able to broadcast it out and do the connections. I'd say the thing we have learned for round two is that if we now know some good locations to go where we can have satellite activity, and we know some not to go to, that the internet connections are just not good enough to make a link and make it work. I was in Winslow, and again, I think we had about 15 people. We really could not hear what was going on at the Honda location. Again, they were very nice. We did get their input in, and that is recorded, but it was embarrassing to be there and not be able to know what's going on. So I did apologize and give them all my business card and tell them, look, if there's additional information you want to come in, we'll even arrange for you to call in and give testimony, and we'll add it to the end of the record. But I guess what I would say is if we have to rely on Skype, it's not very reliable because we don't know what the connection speeds will be. If we can work with agencies that have the connection, that should work well. I did find out in Winslow there's a Northern Pioneer Community College, and they do have links, so perhaps when we go back in that area, we could take a look at using that to link into some of the other facilities. I think that pretty well covers that item. Commission mapping training, I think that whenever the map it is in, I think we're ready to provide that, and if you contact either Ken, Andrew, they can set up times to train you on mapping. And so we're ready to start doing that activity. Strategic telemetry contract update, I'd had questions about whether or not there could be additional changes to the contract to make clear that there's a division between strategic telemetry's work for us and not get confused with any political work that they might do. Mary has drafted some language on that and some goals. I will let her mention kind of the approach, but I would say that while you gave me authority to execute the contract, in talking to Mary, I don't have authority to amend the contract, so if you want to proceed that way, I can, you can certainly authorize me to amend it along the lines Mary provides.
There was authority to negotiate the contract, not execute.
I went back and looked at the wording for both meetings, and the first meeting did say specifically that I did not need to bring it back to the commission. And my recollection when I listened to it, it also said I could execute. The second meeting, there was confusion about whether I had that authority, but what I heard was Mary say clearly I had authority to do it. Whether I wished to do it or not was up to me. And there was then the discussion about having an opportunity to add some amendments to the contract. I did not realize at the time that I didn't have authority to amend the contract, but I did have authority, I believed, and with legal counsel support, that's when I executed the contract. But I'd be happy to talk further about that if you'd like, or we can sit down and look. But I felt that you had authorized me to go ahead and execute it, and that's what I did.
Madam Chair?
Mr. Rivera.
Just for the record, my recollection was that we gave Mr. Bladeen the authority to negotiate and execute the contract as well. I remember that meeting clearly, and so there's no confusion on my part. My only question was regarding the amendment to the contract. I'd like to get some more information on how this came about and what the amendment will say, because that I would like to know.
Perhaps I could ask Mary to just talk about the concept she's thought about as a part of my report, since she can do it better.
Sure. Ms. O'Grady.
Sure. We were following up on issues I think that Commissioner Freeman had raised at the earlier meeting, and what we're looking at is something that would make it clear that Strategic can't execute any contracts in Arizona, work on any projects in Arizona while they're working on redistricting. Was one aspect of it. And also a documentation, sort of that transparency in terms of keeping a log of any contacts regarding this project. Not necessarily staff contacts and commissioner contacts, but if there are any kind of third-party contacts about this work, those would be documented. And so, again, providing some transparency and accountability in terms of who all is contacting our consultants, if anyone. Sometimes I think they do get, for example, some media calls that might be handled. I don't know if there's actually been others, but those were some of the issues that we were addressing. We had explored the possibility of like a screen to screen off people on this project from some of the other projects, which did not seem feasible or really in the at all, because we're dealing with a small business here, and we want to, and so to get the expertise we need to get the project done right, that really wasn't feasible. But so we did explore different things like that, and where we landed was agreement on no additional contracts in Arizona, and then the documentation process. So that's what we're working on, and we can put that on a future agenda. in terms of approval.
Madam Chair?
His authority to amend.
Mr. Herrera?
Yeah, in the future, I'd like to know, if, and I respect Mr. Freeman and his his input on the contract, but I think we as a commission should, if an individual commissioner has changes to the contract, we should all be notified before before you enter into those changes with strategic, because I don't mind the first two. The last one I think is unreasonable, considering it is a small firm. So I would hope in the future you bring this up before it even goes to strategic, because I think we should, at a minimum, know about what's going on. This is the first time I hear about it. So,
Madam Chair, Commissioner Herrera, the third item that I mentioned, that screen, was not something that I was proposing because it didn't seem like it would work. And the proposal was to put this on a future agenda so that to address your concern. Yes, if there are amendments, it comes back to the full commission.
And Madam Chair, I made all my comments in the public hearing, so perhaps Commissioner Herrera doesn't remember.
Madam Chair?
Mr. Herrera?
No, I understand the comments you made. I didn't know there were amendments. They're two different things. When you make, because I made plenty of comments in public that weren't added to the or part of the contract. And my understanding, if they were not amendments, they were just comments that you made. So I apologize if I misunderstood them as being amendments. I didn't see it.
They were requests for a future agenda item to discuss modifications to the contract with strategic telemetry, and I outlined a few of those proposals.
Okay. I apologize if I.
Okay. So that will be a future agenda item at probably our next meeting, that you'll be coming to us and providing those amendment proposal ideas to us. Okay?
The next item I had was just introduction of Stuart Robinson, and I see Stu here. He's our new PIO and been on board 2 weeks. Tomorrow, 2 weeks. He's been baptized by fire coming in. There's a lot going on. He certainly has been a big help to me in helping getting statements drafted, providing information to the press, and I'm very glad that we have him. He certainly is available to assist any of you also if there's some things that you'd like to have him address. I told him he works for me and we work for you, so please use him as you feel is appropriate in terms of getting commission information out. And just to summarize, we've introduced people before, at least sent resumes. We have 2 other members of the staff that had helped with the outreach and have done a very good job, Christy Olson and Lisa Schmeling. And both of them are also right now doing the logging of all these public documents that you're going to be getting copies of. And I think they're going to be doing a good job. Earlier we'd indicated that Anna Garcia is our executive assistant, and she was very helpful in getting translations of documents in a quick period of time, and also ranging for translators. So we have a couple more positions we could fill up. We probably will start to do that as we move towards the second phase of hearings, and as we get more data that we need to get organized and submitted. And that is probably recent events. We are trying to keep up with all of you as you travel the state and make sure the facilities are set up and people are there and that security is provided. And we will continue to do that and look forward to when we can get down to the mapping activity. And if there's any questions, I'd be glad to try to answer them.
Okay.
Madam Chair?
Mr. Herrera?
Yeah, I want to commend the staff on the excellent job they've done with the first round of hearings. I think they did a really good job of spreading it throughout the state, including areas that through streaming. I've enjoyed attending a good number of them and listening to some of them. I said on the streaming and encourage the public to keep attending. And I enjoy the comments about I've been hearing a lot about competitiveness and how important it is to the state, and I agree with that, and I hope I continue hearing comments like that, because it is exactly what we want to hear that will help us put together those maps. So thank you. Thank you to the staff.
Thank you. Other comments and questions?
Madam Chair?
Mr. Sturts?
Mr. Bladine, in regards to the budget appropriations and the correct information, you had said that we obviously spent some money in the last fiscal year, so the 500,000 did not carry over?
The balance carried over of about 400,000. I think we spent 900, or spent 100,000, and about 900,000 carried over. It was in that last budget report I presented you, and I don't remember it exactly, but.
What is your anticipation of when you'll be providing us an ongoing budget, an ongoing cost report? Where's our, what our expenditures are, so that we can, ourselves and the public can know how much is being spent on an ongoing basis?
As I mentioned to you several months ago when we talked about the budget, I would try to do that on a monthly basis as we get the expenditures in through the state system, then update the expenditures against what we budgeted and kind of see where we are so we can monitor it, because it is clear as we move forward there's a lot of things that are going to be different in terms of the cost than we thought. Translations has probably a lot more than I originally had thought they might be. Meeting locations might be a little less because we've gotten a lot of service from other parts of the community, but certainly I understand you want to monitor and manage the budget as I do, so we'll try to, once we get the data from the state, provide an updated monthly, where are we and against what we've budgeted, and recommend any changes that we might see that need to be made.
Okay, so when are we going to see the numbers?
As soon as I get the numbers from the state of Arizona, and I don't have any idea, honestly, when I will see those.
When will we know when you're going to know? Mr. Bladine, all I'm trying to do is to try to get a handle on where we are currently and where you anticipate this being. I know that you've just had a large amount of expenditures over the last 4 weeks. The selection of the mapping consultant, you had a retainer check that you had to issue to them. We've had staff increases, I understand that. We've had money that's gone out to the legal counsel. We've had money going out all over the state to different locations and different uses, and I understand all that. So I'm just trying to be able to know when we're going to. Is it in 30 days, in 60 days?
I will certainly find out how long it takes for the state expenditures to come through the system in a day or two. I'm used to a system where monthly expenditures are maybe available 2 weeks to 10 days after the end of the close of the month, which closed, 2 days ago. I would think once I get that, it won't take me very long to go through it and prepare a report for you. I'm going to guess that we'll probably be about 3 weeks behind the close of the month before I'll have that information, but I'll certainly get a better time estimate once I can talk to our financial people at the state board's office.
So best case, the best case as you know it now, that would be in the third week of the month following the expenditure month. We should anticipate seeing where we were historically. And at that same time, would you be providing us a budget on a going forward basis?
Right. My plan would be looking at the expenditures against what I had previously estimated, change those expenditures based upon what we now know and what we can see coming up in the future.
Okay, terrific. Let's go to the next line item, which is public hearings. Again, I'm going to echo Mr. Herrera's comments. I think that the public hearings for a new group of individuals coming together with new technology was pretty exceptional, with very few hiccups. And I think that your corrective measures that you're taking are appropriate. I did have a question about the level of security that we are having. There were in Tucson, in South Tucson yesterday, there were 5 officers inside the room with us, and I'm trying to find out, one, whether or not if that's an anticipation that you expect to have that much security, and I will want to ask the question if there is anything that has come about that has led you to believe that there is a security problem at any of these outreach meetings.
My comment would be that we have had contact with the Department of Safety about the fact that there has been some verbal and other possible threats against members of the commission. They haven't necessarily been in a public meeting, and for that reason we talked to them. They have put us on whatever they call their watch to notify local agencies that they should be aware of we're holding meetings there and when. We have had a policy, as the last commission did, or at least as last staff did, and I guess the commission supported it, of at each area at least having one uniformed officer. In some cases, we have paid for the uniformed officer. In other cases, the agency has provided it because they thought it was in the public interest and public safety to do that. So yes, last time they had security at all the meetings. We are also doing that at this time. The amount of security pretty much depends on what the local area thinks is appropriate. And I don't know this for sure, but I'm assuming that's in consultation with the Department of Public Safety.
And Mr. Bladen, who's making, first of all, I have not been made aware as a commissioner, as I've been attending these meetings, that there have been any of these issues that you've talked about. And if I'm at one of these hearings and I'm unaware, why, the question to me would be, why am I not being made aware?
As I mentioned a minute ago, that we really have not had a problem in the meetings.
Okay.
What I have had is concern that individual commissioners have had activity that could be called intimidating and also threatening. And certainly if any one of you were to call me and tell me that, I would pass it on to the Department of Public Safety and would take action to make sure that there's nothing more than talk. And if it were happening in this room, certainly we'd all know about it and could talk about it. I've only seen one instance where I thought perhaps we were getting to a point an officer would be needed at the meetings I attended. That was in South Phoenix, where a threat was yelled across the room, but the individual left, and so there was no need for a police action. But I think we all are as familiar with the kind of rhetoric and the kind of comments that have been made in the public meetings. Certainly there's a right of free speech, and we're not talking about doing anything to dissuade that. But I think it's incumbent upon me when approached by a commissioner with safety concerns to make sure that's passed on to the appropriate authorities, and that's what I did. I'm not sure whether or not it's my responsibility, but you can correct me if I'm wrong, to pass that on to all of you. I guess I could at least tell you that there's like I am now, there has been a concern, but I think that's something that I would think the individual commissioner should make a decision about whether or not they want to talk about that.
Okay, thank you. In regarding the second round schedule, where are we in the development of the schedule and the locations?
At this point, the only thing we have is the last schedule we provided to you when we did the first phase. As soon as we finish these rounds of hearings, we'll start again to set those up. We will bring a memo back to you. I think what we told you last time is that we'd probably go back to the same locations but add some that we missed. I certainly welcome any specific directions in that area that you'd like to give us. I would hope that next week we would be able to start again because the hearings will be concluded.
And Madam Chair, on that point, since that's not an agendized item, we just have to put the second round hearings on a future agenda for discussion.
Thank you. I'm sorry. I should have remembered.
Okay. Then we'll go to D, the commission mapping training. You had mentioned that there was going to be training to be coordinated. Is this to be coordinated between the individual commissioners and a member of strategic telemetry?
That's my understanding, that they're willing to work with your schedules to do the training. Perhaps I could ask Mr. Strassma to tell us what he's able to do in that regard.
Yes, as I believe I mentioned at the last meeting, we want to schedule at the commissioner's convenience. That could be either through the end of this first round of hearings. Andrew will be here starting tomorrow covering the hearings if anyone wants to set up something with him. Otherwise, at some future date, perhaps around the next commission hearing. So just contact us directly and we'll set up something at your convenience.
Okay. I think this is a relevant item, but Ms. O'Grady, you can correct me if I'm wrong because this isn't specifically on this. To be trained, we'd have to have the software and the computers?
And I
Can
know...
I ask the question if we've got the software and the computers?
I think that's fair related.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
I believe we now have the software. I know, at least in my office, I saw yesterday there was 2 Mappets So I'm assuming you also have, and I believe we have the computers. We may have to switch them around because I think some of the ones we were planning to have for the commissioners we used as a part of the outreach program. But we will have, we may be off one, and we'll get that taken care of. So we will have the computers, and the software is in, so we can start anytime you want.
So, Mr. Bladine, again, when would the software and the hardware be available to the commissioners so that we can adequately have it to make sure that we're not scheduling a time with Mr. Strassman's staff that will not be effective?
I would think we could do, if a commissioner wanted to do it after this meeting and between the other meeting, we have the software, we have the computer. If you want to do it tomorrow, we could do it tomorrow. It's just a matter of getting it set up.
Okay, so you are saying that we have the software and you are able to deliver it to us immediately?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Correct.
Correct.
Okay. Got it. That was the question.
Okay.
Okay. Strategic telemetry contract update. As you look at the schedule of deliverables as was included as part of the contract, what is your opinion of where we stand currently as far as the original contracted schedule, the deliverables that were to be included, and the status of the strategic telemetry deliverables on schedule?
And I know that I got a revised schedule 2 days ago, and I haven't really had a chance to look at it, but the last one I looked at, we are pretty much on schedule to what we had talked about and you'd approved. In terms of the deliverables, they have certainly been very responsive to get all of the materials that we needed for first round public hearings available. That's all done. They have certainly met their requirements in terms of being at the hearings and providing the input. So at this point, I'm not aware of anything that was in their contract at this time that has not been delivered on schedule.
Well, in regards to some specific things that are in their schedule or in their contract that were not tied to the schedule, the social networking and outreach, what is the status of the implementation of that? I know that our Facebook page was implemented by someone not on the Redistricting Commission team or employee. It was somebody from the general public that actually opened up an account and actually did some responding and some dialoguing with the general public that appeared to be on behalf of the commission. I was in the understanding that that was something that strategic telemetry would be posting, managing, and implementing based on their contract.
I'm sorry, that's not the way I saw it. I saw them assisting us, and Stuart Robinson, our PIO, has started a Twitter page for us and has taken control of the Facebook page. My understanding or memory of the contract was that they would interface with us and help us get that accomplished, but that it would be the responsibility of the staff and the PIO to do that. If I'm wrong, we can correct it, but that's what I recall.
Yeah. You're going to want to take a look at the contract because it was not an assistance of, it was an implementation of.
Okay.
So I would suggest that we start drilling down, and if it's convenient for you, I can certainly assist you in pointing out some of the things to making sure that we are staying on track with some of those items.
All right. I'm glad to accept that.
In regards to the PIO introduction, welcome, Stuart. Could you give us an idea, Mr. Bladine, of what your public information officer's job description is, what he's going to be doing, and how he's going to be operating in the public?
I didn't bring the job description that I'd sent to you before, so I'll have to do it as best I can.
I'm doing this for the benefit of the general public.
Okay.
That wasn't privy to our email.
I thank you. Basically, to help us coordinate public hearings, get press releases out, public information, bulletins out about the hearing schedule activities of the commission, draft letters or statements that we might need pertaining to commission work. Right now, he's been helping me get a letter of apology to the city of Flagstaff in northern Arizona. So that's what we're doing. As I mentioned, he did launch the Twitter page. I see him being very much involved in the Facebook, Twitter kind of activity. He's worked to handle the press release types of inquiries that we would get, like we did get on the the original schedule we sent out, and then we had a lot of follow-up calls from local newspapers and media about, okay, what's going on in our area. He's been helping with that and will continue to do that. He's been updating our media contact list so that we'll be able to notify all of the appropriate media about where we'll be. And just in general, being available also to the commissioners and commission chairmen to help get ideas you may have about public information out.
Mr. Blady, in regards to that last statement, I'm not exactly sure. Is that something that when you want to get a piece of, or when a commissioner would want to get a piece of information out, we should deliver that to you, of which you would be delivering that to Stuart?
We could, frankly, we could do it either way, because if you got it directly to Stuart, he would let me know. And if I, for some reason, saw there's a problem, I would get back to you. But if you wish to come through me, that's certainly fine. But I'm also okay if you want to make a direct contact with him and suggest things, because I think he needs to know what all of you are concerned about.
Great, terrific. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Other comments and questions on the executive director report from other commissioners?
Madam Chair.
Mr. Freeman.
I just wanted to follow up on a couple of Commissioner Sturts' questions. You mentioned the equipment that has been installed now, or did that include the printers and the plotters, or do we have them now?
No, we do not have. In fact, we're going to need to upgrade our copier. It's pretty obvious that given the scanning we're doing that machine is not the right size, and we do still need to get some office equipment, as it'll be related to supporting the mapping function.
Okay. I believe part of the proposal was that they would have high-speed color printers and a color plotter capable of producing wall-sized printouts of maps as needed. That's still something that needs to be done.
I'm sorry, Commissioner Freeman, are you saying that's in the contract with?
I believe so. That's
okay.
the proposal, yeah.
We have not installed that in our office. Maybe Ken would like to talk about it, but we do. We have a plan that was in our original equipment that we would need a plotter, but we haven't coordinated with what they may provide and what we may need to purchase. So maybe Mr. Strassma could comment on that a little more.
If I may, Commissioner. Referenced in our proposal is the plotter that we have in our offices. We will be producing wall-sized maps as requested. I imagine the volume will call at some point for the commission staff to want to have their own plotter. We will also be procuring a high-speed color printer for our workspace in the Arizona office, separate from the commission's, and shipping one of our existing high-speed scanners.
Okay, thank you. One other question on the social media issue that Commissioner Sturts mentioned. I believe the proposal called for strategic telemetry to solicit input, that it would employ a process, an automated process to gather data from social media sites like Facebook and Twitter, and basically collect public input that way, and then catalog it and make it a part of our record. Is that taking place?
To my knowledge, that hasn't been started yet, no, unless, Ken, do you want to comment?
If I may, we have begun the web scraping process specifically on Twitter. We are working with the commission staff and the legal team about how public comment is going to be documented and cataloged. We've submitted to the company Catalyst that will be maintaining the legal database a sample of the first web scrapes from Twitter referencing ARC or Arizona Redistricting. To go through the testing process of loading that up, and there is a meeting scheduled Friday for our staff and commission staff on how that will be accessed and coded. So that is in process.
Thank you.
Questions and comments? Are you finished, Mr. Freeman?
I was just checking.
No, go ahead.
I think that's all I have.
Okay. Any other questions and comments on the executive director report?
I'm going to have to budget more time.
Yeah, well, we haven't had a meeting since July 8th, and I know there's been a lot going on. I had a few comments. The update on the status of public records requests, I do think that whenever one of those comes in, that letter or email or however it comes in should be sent out to all commissioners, because I actually learned about one online, just on the internet, and I didn't know we had it. So
Okay.
it'd be helpful for all commissioners to be aware of that as soon as it comes in. The first round public hearings, I also wanted to extend my gratitude to the staff, to council, to the commissioners, to our mapping consultant, and everyone who helped host those meetings and is hosting. They're continuing. This first round isn't over yet. And they've been phenomenal. It's been the funnest part of this whole commission, frankly, is to go out and hear directly from the communities that we're visiting. And I wish we could visit every town, frankly, because I know that's not practical, and I'm sure you're ready to fall over. But the press coverage has been great. I thank the press for covering that information. It's really been good, and I look forward to more. And frankly, I'd be happy to add some more. I know that Mr. Freeman and maybe other commissioners too have suggested some other hearings, and if we can make that happen and yet still not, sacrifice deadlines with our mapping process, I'd really like to do it. So to the extent we can add any more, and I know that Mr. Freeman and I were in Pine Top, and a location got mentioned as an area, like a Payson area, that was one that people felt like there was a void. And if there are any other places, regions that we kind of missed during this first round so far, if we could add those and make it happen, I'd like to do it. And I know it's a big push for everybody, but if we can do it, I'd like to.
Hey, Madam Chair?
Mr. Herrera?
As I mentioned, excuse me, my comments about the public hearings, that they're going well, and that I think we've done a pretty good job of spreading them out. And I'm looking forward to the second round. The only thing I caution is adding more. We've had a couple of them where there's only one commissioner, or sometimes one commissioner by Skype because he accidentally forgot. So and also for the staff, I worry about the staff. I think I don't want to overburden them. So if we're going to start adding other locations, then we also need to allow them to hire as many staff as they need, with us having to get involved in terms of in the hiring and slowing that down. So if we're going to be doing that, I want to, like I said, care about the staff. We have a good set of people, including our attorneys, and I want to make sure we keep them around. And I'm going to be a champion for the staff as well. So I want to make sure that we respect their time in the evening, because they do have families.
I appreciate that. And I mean, a lot of the commissioners have families or jobs, and so it's definitely a push. But I do think that to the extent it's possible, and I don't want to go overboard. I mean, we can't, just continue first round hearings into November or anything. But just if there were a way to add any voids, that would be helpful.
And Madam Chair, I would say again a future agenda item on additional hearings.
Okay.
And they might want to hear at some point. Another agenda item will be summarizing the input from prior hearings and kind of see where it stands in terms of what you're getting. But that, I think, a future agenda item, given what's on the agenda today.
But this says first round public hearings update and status, and it seems like what I'm proposing is additional first round hearings, that's part of it. So, not to overrule the legal counsel, but I'm just trying to clarify. So, were there spots, Mr. Freeman, that you had specifically thought we should go to? Or Ms. McNulty or Mr. Sturts? Or?
Let me find my email. I had proposed, and I believe I might have first proposed it in our last hearing, but then I subsequently did in emails to Mr. Bladine, that we cover, again, the Southeast Valley with a hearing, so we would make sure to cover the Chandler, Gilbert, Queen Creek area. The West Valley, probably in my mind, deserved another hearing. That would be the Surprise, Avondale, Litchfield Park area. Perhaps Oro Valley and Marana. We've already heard lots of comments from them, and I know we've had a commission hearing down in Oro Valley, but it was not a commission hearing focused on the intake of public comment for mapping purposes, and it did not include the presentation by the mapping consultant. Those areas of the state, to me, seem like they're interesting areas because they're areas of growth coupled with where growth intersects political, tribal, and geographic boundaries. So there's lots of, and no doubt the communities of interest that the people in those areas would ask be respected. So those are some areas. And then I know from, I know we had Bisbee on our schedule, but it got dropped, and I did not know why it got dropped. And I know that there might be a very good reason, or we were told they couldn't accommodate us, or forget about it, there's no one's going to show. But maybe if I knew the reason, I would understand that. And I know when we were at Honda, we heard some comments about how Payson and Globe and Safford, so Gila County and Greenlee County or Graham County didn't have a stop. So, and those don't have to be all, obviously some of those could be covered by satellite intakes if appropriate, but those were some of my thoughts on where we would cover it first round. And I agree that the second round is a very interesting round in that there's going to be a map proposed, presumably. But going back to my comments I made earlier, and maybe that is, I don't think that necessarily solves the problem because there's a map already, and now the public has to confront that map, whereas right now it's a clean slate. So I was interested in maybe hitting those areas in the first round as well as the second round.
Okay. Thoughts on any of those locations from other commissioners?
Madam Chair, this was identified as a report from the executive director for an update.
Okay.
And I do have concern about, I think it's fair to, for the commissioners to comment on the report, but not debate the issue of additional public hearings.
Okay.
Because that should have been then noticed so that people could show up and express their views on that issue.
Okay. So we can't talk about adding additional hearings at this time, right?
Madam Chair, staff has the input that it's received, and I think if there's going to be further discussion, it would need to be a specific agenda item.
Okay.
So the public has notice.
Okay. The next item I wanted to comment on was the PIO introduction and staff update. I think we're all very interested in the social media aspect of strategic telemetry's proposal, and I think it would make sense, Mr. Bladine, to have Stuart work with strategic telemetry on that particular aspect, since he's already starting some of that social media work, and it would make sense to have the interface be there if you agree. I think that's it for me. Any other questions or comments on the executive director report? Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Bladine. Let's see, what time are we before, see how Marty's doing? Okay, could we take a 5-minute recess? It's 2:53, so we'll be back in 5 minutes, just a quick break. Thank you. Okay, we'll enter back into public session. The time's 3:04 p.m. The next item on the agenda is agenda item 4, strategic telemetry mapping presentation on possible grid map processes and options, discussion, and possible commission direction to the consultant. Public comment will be allowed regarding the options prior to commission's actions. So if I could ask Mr. Strasma to go ahead and tell us about his grid map processes and the options.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As the Commission knows, Proposition 106 specifies that the mapping process begin with a grid-like map, which is our next step on the timeline, is to create that map. And I wanted to today ask for direction from the Commission on the process that we should follow. I thought it would be worthwhile to give some background on how the grid process was done last time around, and to present a few options that we have looked at, although there are no doubt infinite options, and the commissioners may have other suggestions or want to provide other direction. If the Commission is able to see the screen here for the grid process, one of the things that I think would be useful to see, if we could get the next slide. This is a slide of the grid map that was used in the last process. And I think it's useful to see for two key takeaways. As one, to the uninitiated, your first reaction might be, well, that's not a grid. And of course, the problem is the population in the state, with more than half of the population in Maricopa County, doesn't lend itself to be a perfectly square grid. So this was the starting point for the last commission's process. If we could see the next slide, you'll see the great difference between that starting point and the first draft map that was published for comment by the last commission. And then in the next slide, we see the final adopted map in 2002. So as you can see from there, the final maps, although they started with the grid map, did end up fairly different from the initial grid. And the initial grid is not, despite anyone's best efforts, going to look exactly like a chessboard. I would like to walk through a few different options for how we could go about drawing this grid map, flag a few issues that the commissioners may wish to weigh in on, and then just seek your guidance. I brought up at the last meeting the process that we had in mind, which is what we're calling using a literal grid, where we take a latitude and longitude, divide the state for the congressional district into thirds. So there's 3 across and 3 up and down, and basically drop that, to quote one of the commissioners, drop the tic-tac-toe board on top of the state. You can see the next slide. And the next, so starting with just the state and counties there, and then next. Okay, so this is the literal grid applied to the state. Now, Arizona's geographic features don't follow nice, neat, straight lines. So even when we're able to use the mapping software to assign all the census blocks that are within each of these green cells on the literal grid, and we could just cycle through that. We'll just show the process that we went through. As you can see, it's not the perfect square, but that's any blocks that were intersecting the green lines, and then went through repeating the process for all nine districts. So that's a fairly straightforward process that does give us 9 very close to grid-like districts. Now, of course, the problem is that is not going to meet equal population. The grid map goals are to be as compact and contiguous as possible and meet the equal population requirements. And they will not meet any of the other criteria specified in the Constitution. That's what happens in the adjustment process. If we could have the next slide. This is a slide that is shaded by population. The green grid cells are the ones that are overpopulated. The red ones are underpopulated. The darker red, the greater the underpopulation. And so as you can see there, 3.3 million in the central grid and very underpopulated cells at the top. We stopped at this point. I did not want to go too far down the line on any one of these processes without getting input from the commission. We would have to follow a process to adjust the population for these. What I had recommended at the last meeting was that we follow a geographic hierarchy where we make adjustments starting first with whole counties where possible, then county subdivisions, census tracts, census block groups, and finally census blocks, using first the largest pieces of population possible, working on down, that we, where possible, make the cells square. That is to say, if we need to add or subtract from a cell that is higher than it is wide, we attempt to make it shorter. If it's wider than it's high, we attempt to make it more narrow. One of the questions that I present to the Commission is also the order in which we do the adjustments. This map here could be adjusted either starting at one of the extremes of the state and adding population until getting to the ideal, the 71,224 for a congressional district, or it could be adjusted starting at the center and shedding population. It's not, although my goal is to have this be a purely clinical and technical exercise that we can get through fairly quickly and start getting to some of the more difficult aspects of this process, there are implications to the approach taken. And one of the things that has come up very often in the public hearings is the question of the number of districts on the northern and southern borders. And as we'll address when I walk through the process that the previous commission took, I believe, I don't wish to speak for them, that was one of the reasons for the quadrant approach that was taken by the previous commission. I would suggest that if there is concern about a process leading to a single northern or single southern district, that could be part of the process that the commission specifies. We could, for example, say that no adjustments would result in there being fewer than 2 districts bordering the northern and southern borders. Although I remind you again of the difference between the initial grid and the first draft map, that there is a great difference between those two. So, except perhaps for perception's sake, the initial grid doesn't lock anyone to anything. If you could see the next slide. And this is just showing the same process as it would apply to legislative districts. And the malapportionment in terms of population is even more extreme. Next. On the legislative level, you can see again the overpopulated with green. And we would propose following the same adjustment process, starting with the largest units of geography, counties, moving to county subdivisions, census tracts, census block groups, and then finally census blocks. Next, please. Oh. Is that the last one there? Okay. I apologize. I apparently saved the wrong draft of this. There is another slide, but I will just describe it for you and walk you through the process that was taken last time, where rather than having the tic-tac-toe board approach, the state was divided into quadrants, starting at the Gila and Salt River Meridian, basically the southwest center of the state, divided the state into 4 quadrants. And then began building the districts using much the same process I described, starting with the largest units of geography and moving smaller in a spiral-shaped pattern, starting in one of the quadrants, moving, I believe, clockwise out from the center of the state. One other variation on that I believe would be viable would be if instead of starting at that center point, we were to start at one of the 4 corners of the state. I would suggest, just in the spirit of making sure that there's not any kind of perception that the starting point is leading to any desired outcome, that some element of randomness could be introduced. If the commission is comfortable with one of these different approaches, they could instruct us to do it, and then perhaps even here today, the commission could draw lots for direction on starting point, direction that we move around the state, aspects like that would introduce some level of randomness. With that, I would be glad to answer any questions and solicit the commission's direction.
Ken, I can't read the map very well from here, so I was just curious, the red and what do the other colors mean?
Right, this is the population deviation from the 213,000 ideal district population for a legislative district. Mm-hmm. And basically what it's showing us is the green legislative districts there are the ones that are very overpopulated. Anything in red is underpopulated. Okay. And that is, basically, as we know, the concentration of the state largely into urban areas leads to those 4 very overpopulated districts that have to be adjusted, made smaller to move the population out to any of the other districts that are shown in red currently.
Okay, other questions for Ken on these different alternatives?
Madam Chair?
Mr. Herrera?
I'm in favor of something random. I think you gave us some choices, and it'd be nice for us to either randomly select a random choice. Does that make sense? And for us to move forward with the process. I know we have a deadline, a timeline that we need to help you meet. So if it's something random, I hopefully that would be non-controversial and we can move forward.
Other thoughts?
Madam Chair?
Mr. Sturts?
I'm not exactly sure what a random starting point means. You've got, what we're required to do right now is to craft 30 equal population districts in the state and pick from a starting point. Is your goal today for us to give you a starting quadrant to begin from, to work out from?
That and a process, Commissioner, that I've outlined 3 different possible approaches, and any one of which I think would work well, and I'm certainly open to any other processes. But if the Commission can direct the process, and then my suggestion as to the element of randomness was so that the process itself doesn't dictate the ending map.
So for example, if you chose the densest, smallest, densest area in the center of Phoenix as your starting point and crafted a, was it 712,000?
224.
224, thank you. You rephrased it, and I'll now take that, 71224. And that is your, as your starting point, and then worked out, how would you see that, in that scenario, how would you see that working?
I guess I would say the element of randomness would be the starting point, whether you directed us to start in the center of the most overpopulated district or to start from the least populated district.
And if you started at the center of the most populated district, for example, and worked your way out in equal distance in a grid from that location, that would create your center square on your Scrabble board to be able to work from. And then you'd build your blocks off from that, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And would you recommend following the similar pattern for legislative districts as well? Would you approach both legislative and congressional districts in the same way?
I guess that would be my recommendation. There's no reason they couldn't be done in different procedures, but I also don't see any reason to do them differently.
Okay.
And if I could elaborate also on the question of randomness, starting at the center of the most compact, if the Commission wished, another element of randomness would be the direction from there. If we've built the initial square, do we start above it, diagonally above it at 1 o'clock, at 3 o'clock, et cetera, if the Commission wished to specify that.
That is how the last commission did it, right? Where they flipped a coin and determined which direction to move once
Correct.
they had picked a starting point. And so, how
Let's flip a coin.
Well,
what are thoughts on how the last commission did it? Did people review that at all, or have feelings, or
Madam Chair?
Mr. Sturts?
The reason I had brought this up to Mr. Strassman at our last meeting was because of the way that the language is written into the Constitution. The constitutional language shows that after we create a grid-like pattern across the state, adjustments to the grid shall be made as necessary to accommodate the goals set forth below, which is the 6 criteria. Therefore, the level of randomness is paramount because it would lead to could lead to by where the starting point becomes it could lead to which direction that you could actually want to grow or adjust these lines. How do we show to the general public that this process is as absolutely clear and participatory and transparent as possible in the creation of the grid, which will then be adjusted? And how do we track these adjustments on an ongoing basis as they're made?
Yeah. In taking your second question first on how they are tracked, we can take, as I've described before, snapshots of the adjustment process at every step along the way. So if the Commission wants to see, this is just District 1 adjustments, and then along the way, as those adjustments are made, we will save all of that. And then in terms of assuring the public about the openness and transparency of it, I believe that this discussion is going a long way towards that, and that rather than our coming and presenting a grid map and saying, here's the grid, will you approve it, soliciting direction from the Commission allows the public to see, and also as I see on the agenda, there is a potential for public input on this question now as well, and I believe those are both valuable steps.
Terrific.
And Madam Chair,
Mr. Herrera?
is Mr. Sturts proposing a starting point? Because I'm open.
Well,
How I think that the grid map is a starting point, and as you can tell by the grid map previously and what they ended up, it was nothing what they started with. So I'm very comfortable with us having a grid map and not debating it, because it is a starting point, and then we'll have plenty of time for us to discuss where we move the lines once we come up with a grid map?
Before I make a recommendation or to move on a particular direction, I'd like to hear from the rest of the commissioners.
Other commissioners?
Sure, I'll make a comment. My understanding is that the purpose of the grid map is really to make clear that we're starting over, that we're not taking the existing districts and moving them around. We're wiping the slate clean and we're starting over. And for want of a better place to start over, we're starting over with 9 and 30 boxes. They won't be square boxes, but 9 and 30 sections of equal population. And so what we need to do right now is create that map of 9 and 30 sections of equal population. And once you do that, in whatever procedure we direct you to do it, you're going to bring it back to us, and then we, the 5 of us, are going to make every single change to that map until we get to the final map. So it isn't as if that map has any significance other than starting over. That's my perspective on it. Once it comes back to us, whatever it looks like, we're all going to work with it, and what I'm sure will be some, very detailed and probably difficult before we're done processes to get to the final map. But the grid map in and of itself decides virtually nothing. So I would be, open to a process as long as it is in fact objective and clinical, and I like the idea of randomness. I think that's fair. Whether we put center, northeast, west, south in a hat and we pull those out, and then that's our first, direction. That's what we're going to either start in the center or we're going to start in a corner, or I don't know, maybe we could start in all corners. And then the second hat we pull out which direction we move in from whichever hat we first started with. I'd be comfortable with something like that.
Mr. Freeman?
Yeah, I think if it's a matter of picking a starting point, what grid to start from and apply the algorithm, we could easily assign values to each one of the grids and with a pocket calculator generate randomly some values as to what the starting point would be. But I think our agenda allows for some public comment on that before we make that decision, so I think we should do that before we commit to any process.
Okay. Any other thoughts?
Just one quick thought. Commissioner McNulty is in her point about where we're starting from. This is just as a clarification, this is a constitutional requirement that a grid map be crafted. So a grid map has to be crafted before we can move on to the next step. And just as a clarification to the public, it's in Section 14 of Proposition 106 that a grid map is the starting point. And even though it may not appear to have a relevance on the end product, it is. The public, when they voted on this constitutional change, said that this was a good idea to do. And I think Commissioner McNulty is absolutely correct. It was the concept of us not adjusting existing lines, but wiping the state clean and starting over again. We're one of the very few states that actually operates this way. And it's unique, and that's why this grid map component is included in the Constitution, for us to be able to move it forward from a clean slate. So from that point, I'll turn it back to you, and maybe the public can share their comments.
Okay.
Madam Chair?
Mr. Herrera?
No, just keeping in mind that we do have a meeting tonight.
Right.
And I want to make sure that we give Mr. Strasman the information that he needs to proceed with our direction in terms of putting together a grid map for us to look at, hopefully by next week. And so I want to make sure that we keep that in mind, that we anywhere between an hour or less before we have to move on to Glendale.
Okay. So there is provision on the agenda to have public comment on this particular agenda item. And if any of you have any thoughts or comments and would like to address the commission, please feel free to come to the podium. And if you haven't filled out a request to speak form, I'd ask you to do that.
And just for some clarification, it's regarding the grid map only.
Right, agenda item 4. Let me see if I've got one. It's Mr. Bankston, sorry. Representing self, and you'll have to tell us which county you're from, and if you could also spell your name for the record.
Yeah, it's Peter Bankson, Bengtson. I live in Pima County, Legislative District 26. I'm just kind of real intrigued with this process when I saw the map of how they did it last time, and think of the population in Arizona. I'm not sure it's going to come out looking all that much different. But I guess my suggestion would be, if last time they started in the center and worked out, I would suggest you start at a corner and then work in and see how it works out. That seems to be the best way to show an independent way of doing it.
Thank you. Other comments from other members of the public? Ms. Shops, thank you. Representing self from Phoenix, if you could spell your name too for the record.
Yeah, my last name is spelled Schops. I've been to 4 of the other meetings, and part of this section on the agenda today I just have some questions about. There's words that are used of community interest, and when we're talking about defining this map and how we're going to go about drawing the lines on it, I wanted Ken Strasma from Strategic Telemetry to define what is a definition of a community of interest. I haven't found anything out there where these terms are defined for us to make these decisions on. And for him to define what is the transportation corridor being considered. I want to know what are the parameters Strategic Telemetry is looking at when they define what is a community of interest. Additionally, I want to know what particular data they're going to be mining to assist them in defining communities of interest in Arizona, and what software program are they using to gather that data.
Oh, Ms. O'Grady?
Oh, and just a clarification, if it's, this was the public comment on the grid, and the communities of interest and the other issues there don't come into play at the grid. Those aren't considered at this phase of the development of the constitutional process.
Madam Chair?
Mr.
Just for
Herrera?
the record, Strategic Telemetry will not be defining communities of interest, nor competitiveness, nor any other definition. It will be the commission.
Right. Thank you. I'm sorry. Wait.
And Madam Chair, and we can kind of follow up afterwards, because this on the agenda today is just the grid, and that isn't part of the grid development. The grid, as Mr. Strasma explained, is population. Population is the factor there.
Other, Mr. Kraft? Let me pull out his sheet. Mr. James Kraft, you need to say who you're representing and what city or county.
I'm representing myself. I live in Maricopa County in the city of Phoenix. And I wanted to make a public comment tying in Azavia to our grid map as well as Maptitude, because I think they will both work together. Back in December, Roberta Boss and Ken Clark made available to the public that piece of software. The first thing I did within training, met with some Steve Vittori and the folks at that area to train me quickly on how to do a grid map. After the training, I was able to do 3 grid maps, both the spiral as in your suggestions. Now, I found this being a professor and teaching of business courses, there were 3 different approaches. However, in the computer sciences, it became like using Word. One person would say, I want to use Arial font 12. The other would say, I want to use Times Roman font 16. The real basis that became in where I was headed for the grid, and it only took 3 days. You kind of wonder what's taken this so long, which is a frustration. But the other part, in doing the grid, whatever software you have, should immediately be available to the public, because these hearings, they want to go out that night, put in what you see, and see if they agree with it. So you have this dichotomy or this conflict with Isaiah, and I would request that you ask your legal counsel how to remove any possibility of quid pro quo. Maybe Isaiah could come in and say, this is our price to anybody. I'm not sure if that would work, but I've used both Maptitude, I've used both and Isaiah in my areas, and the answers were equivalently the same with my subjective information. It's just a tool. So if you can remove those, then it will give you a clear playing field. Then it becomes what is available for the public to get on their website at 2 a.m. in the morning once O'Grady and Caneville have gone to bed. So that's my observations on both of them. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Other comments on the grid map process, the options that were presented? Okay, we have a few. Mr. Deal, I have your form.
My name is...
Go ahead and spell your name. Thanks.
Last name is Deal, D-I-E-H-L. And I had a suggestion. Mr. Strasma made recommendation or comment with regard to starting in different reference points on the map. Why not do all 3 or 4 and do an overlay of those? Because I think you might find a combination of all of them is going to equate to almost what we desire to create in the effect.
Thank you. Comments from other members of the public on the grid map process? Marcia Bushing, and if you could spell your name for the record and who you're representing.
My name is Marcia Bushing. It's B-U-S-C-H-I-N-G. I'm not representing anyone other than myself. And I'm here just to echo what a number of you have already said. I think that drawing the grid maps is one of the easiest parts of this process. Having worked with this Xavier software, I think that just trying to get equal populations should be a simple process. And I would suggest that you ask your consultants to propose, 2 or 3 or 4 different equal population maps so that you could start to see just where the populations in the state are, because I think that will give you some indication then of the complexity of the task that you have going forward.
Thank you. Other members of the public? Lynn St. Angelo, and you can spell your name and say where you're from.
Yes, St. Angelo, S-T-A-N-G-E-L-O. I'm from Beaman County. I happen to also be from LD 26, which our first speaker is also from. My comment on his suggestion that if the last commission started in the center, that then you should start in a corner. I think that would give the appearance of prejudice against what happened with the first commission. And so I would say instead of doing that is the purpose of it, is to do a random drawing of some kind and let the chips fall where they may. I do like the idea of have several different sets of grid maps, maybe from different things as you do different drawings, and see how it all comes out. That's my suggestion.
Thank you. Sir? Go ahead. Okay, I've got your form then. I remember seeing that. Representing self from Glendale.
Yeah. I guess now's not the appropriate time, like you said. I was going to ask about the glossary or definitions of all the different terms, if they could be put on a website so people like me could know what is being talked about. I don't understand the communities of interest and competitive districts, compact districts, and all of that. I'd like to see that on a glossary of some sort so that I could look it up and see what we're talking about. But this is not the time for that. You said this is just for the map. And then, if I'm correct, I heard somebody say that this map doesn't really mean anything. They're going to make this grid, they're going to do this grid, but the commission is going to finish the thing out. They're going to do what they're going to do, so why are we going through this exercise and making the grids like this if it has no effect, if it may not even be used? You can throw it out and do what you're going to do anyway. So.
Thank you. Other comments from? Any other comments from the public on the grid map options? Okay, thank you for providing input. So that leaves us with some more suggestions. Do commissioners have other thoughts?
Yeah, Madam Chair.
Mr. Herrera?
If it makes sense, either we come up with some random ways of a starting point, put them in a hat or maybe that throttle bottle, and pick. Because to me, I think that doing it randomly is I'm okay with that, and I think that's fair. That's everybody. People are streaming it, watching it. People are here live, so I think that's transparent. So let's do it.
Other thoughts from others?
Madam Chair?
Mr. Sturts?
I think the idea of doing a couple of different grid maps for presentation with using it from a couple of different approaches is good. I think that I'm going to suggest that we do one where you take the center of the most concentrated population district and build both your congressional and your legislative starting point. The direction that it grows from there could be random. I'm going to suggest that we work do another one going from the outside of the state in, and both of those in direction and corner could be absolutely random. Compare those two, bring those back to the commission, discussing how they got to those points, and then a decision can be made for where we grow out of.
Is that a motion, Mr. Sturts?
I can make that in the form of a motion.
I'll second it for purposes of discussion. I have a question, Mr. Strasma, about the idea of preparing two separate grid maps. Is that a problem from your perspective in any way?
No, well, we are certainly happy to do that, Commissioner. One note of caution would be, I think the process will work best if people don't take the maps and try to analyze them about which one has a potential benefit, and which was one of my hopes about picking a process with an element of randomness and going through it. But if the commission wants to see the results of different approaches, we're more than happy to do more than one. My personal editorial would be just to not try to game out which one is going to lead to what final outcomes, because I do believe that is all based on the direction that the commission will give us for the adjustment of the final map.
Madam Chair, I couldn't agree more with that comment. I want to just stay with one. If we have more than one, I agree with Mr. Strasma that I see that happening. Which one will be more advantageous to maybe one or two, maybe all commissioners? So I would stress that we do a random drawing of one map, one grid map, and stick with that. I mean, it's random. I don't know how more unbiased and fair it could be if it is random. So I don't want to do more than one because I think we will end up bickering and arguing over which one to pick, and I don't want to do that. Let's do it random, only do one.
Okay. Other thoughts? Mr. Freeman?
If you generated multiple grid maps, could they be then combined to make, you could take two maps and make a third that would still constitute a grid map?
Commissioner, if I understand correctly, there would be areas that would be in common between the two, much like in states that start with the previous districts. We could see what is in both versions A and version B. Some decision would have to be made about how to deal with areas that are not in common, and they're not having worked this through, but just picturing how the process would work out. I think there would be significant differences.
I would I would prefer to have one random map, but I also think that I agree with Ms. Bushing's point that if we have a couple, it's sort of a learning experience because it gives us some information about where population is, and it's just an exercise. Sure. And whichever one we then choose as a starting point to continue, we're going to make a number of changes to, and I think we are going to bicker. And I think, I do think it is going to be difficult. So I I guess I'm willing to do it either way, with the understanding that if we did 2, it would be more of a learning exercise for us. I would not support the idea of doing 2 with the idea of having to merge them at the end of that process. I would support doing 2 just to see how population lays out, and then we would have to proceed from there. I guess maybe one disadvantage of doing, well, never mind.
And just building on that, I suppose if 2 or 3 grid maps were prepared and the commission couldn't make a decision on which one, we could decide which one to go with by lot. And there's your randomness.
That's fine too.
I like that.
I guess my next question would be to Mr. Strassman. Was Commissioner Sturts' motion, did that give you sufficient direction, or are there other bits of information you would need from the...
Thank you, Commissioner. I did want to seek clarification as to if we were talking about the quadrant system or the literal grid, or I suppose if we were talking about multiple maps, did you want us to work out options for both?
I understood the motion to be that one would be from the center point working out, and that there would be a random choice as to which direction to move in, and perhaps we would choose that random choice right now. And the second would be from the outside of the state moving in, and again, with a random decision on direction, and maybe we need to decide whether that random decision is which corner, or whether would that be at which corner and which direction?
Which corner, which direction?
Okay, so we would, if that motion were to carry, we would have to draw 3 things out of a hat. The first would be the direction that you would go in from the center. The second would be the corner that you would start in from the exterior. And the third would be the direction you move in from that exterior corner. Is that?
That's correct. Madam Chair?
Mr. Sturts?
Mr. Strassman, in clarification of the grid, meaning that these would be try to remain in a grid-like pattern, not very similar to how you had presented in your 9 by, your 3 by 3 and your 6 by 5, but you would start from a square that would be of equal population, starting from the center of the densest district within the state, for both the congressional and legislative districts. And then we'll pick the direction of which you're going to go out and to start build blocks around it, in the order of which you had described earlier, which is using your census tracking and blocking methods.
Okay. Thank you,
geographic
Commissioner. That gives me
higher-
sufficient direction.
Yep, okay, so we should probably do that here now, determine those. Anybody have a coin?
Mr. Bladine is...
Mr. Bladine has his hat and his...
I don't have a hat. I don't even have a coin.
I don't either.
Well, I do.
So the question out of the first is it clockwise or counterclockwise?
Yeah.
That's first.
As the direction from the center.
As a direction from the center.
Right.
There you go.
Okay.
Freeman has a coin.
All right. I think legal counsel needs to flip the coin. Now, can we verify that there are not 2 heads on that coin?
Pass it around.
All right.
2 tails.
2 tails, that's all right. So,
Who's the best catch? So you're right.
all right,
believe it.
Madam Chair,
Let me look at that coin.
you're satisfied with the coin, Madam Chair?
Yes, this is one of the earlier quarters from 1965, actually.
How long have you
There's
had
a head
that?
and a tail.
Okay, so since I made the request, I'll flip heads clockwise, tails counterclockwise.
Is that fair that a Republican's flipping the coin? No, let's, please.
I'll flip it to you.
Okay, let me see. I want to make sure you see. Go and flip it.
Ready? What did I say, heads clockwise?
Heads clockwise.
Yep.
Tails counterclockwise. Okay?
So it was tails, so it's counterclockwise.
Counterclockwise.
Okay.
Next is which direction, so we're starting from the center, and you'll be building blocks out from the center. Build your box and work your way out from there counterclockwise.
Okay.
Next question was, we have to pick
Which corner?
which corner. So this is going to be east or west, north or south. Okay, so I'll do east-west,
Is it northeast?
northeast,
Northwest?
northwest,
Southwest? Southeast?
southeast. So I'll do northeast or northwest, heads, tails. Northeast, northwest, heads, tails. Okay?
Just my clarify, we're doing east versus west in one flip and north versus south in another?
Yes.
Okay.
That's correct.
And which is the question for the first flip? I apologize.
I don't know, pick one. Does that work?
Yeah, I think maybe the way he said it was
Okay, east versus west?
Yeah.
East heads. I want to be fair and equitable with the.
Sure. We got anybody complaining.
Absolutely. Now the question is, east is heads?
East is heads.
Right?
Heads.
Heads, east. Okay. And now we are doing
north versus south.
Now it's whether it's north or south?
north or south. Heads north.
Yep.
Tails start from the south.
Okay.
So we're
So we'll
starting
begin
from
at
the
the
south.
southeast corner.
Southeast corner. Okay.
And one more as to direction.
Direction, and we're going counterclockwise or clockwise, is that correct? Okay. Counterclockwise or clockwise? Heads is clockwise. Heads is clockwise.
Okay.
I'm hoping that the audience and the general public who's watching this today is, one, respectful of the randomness of this and amused by the process.
Thank you.
Yes, it did.
Great. So we have a motion that's been seconded to basically authorize Mr. Strasma to generate 2 grid maps, one starting in the center, most dense district of the state, and will work outwards clockwise based on geographic hierarchy.
Counterclockwise.
Oh, it was counterclockwise? Thank you. This is like a game show. Excuse me, I had written clockwise, so it's counterclockwise. Thank you. Based on based on geographic hierarchy. The second grid map will be starting in the southeast corner, and we'll move clockwise around the state, and again, using geographic hierarchy as how you would add those sectors. And so with that, is there any other discussion on that motion? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the motion carries.
Madam Chair, my only question is, when are we going to see the one or two the 2 drafts?
How long will it take to generate the 2 grid maps?
If you can give us a week.
Okay, a week. Is that okay with everybody?
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Does that still keep us on track a whole week?
Yes, I believe it does, Commissioner. And I believe another agenda item is future meetings. But as long as we can have this done before the next meeting, I believe we can.
Okay. And is that the kind of thing we can put on our website, the grid maps? Is that possible?
Why not?
Buck can advise later, but good. Yeah, I think that would be a good thing to show, since it's a constitutional requirement. Any other comments on the possible grid map processes or randomness? Okay. Our next item on the agenda, let me check the time. Where are we? Okay, about 3:50 p.m. We probably need to wrap this meeting up by 4:30 in order to make it to Glendale for the hearing at 6. So with that in mind, let's move to the next agenda item. Number 5, report legal advice and direction to council regarding Attorney General inquiry. The commission may vote to go into executive session, which would not be open to the public for any item listed on the agenda for the purpose of obtaining legal advice. So given that there is an Attorney General inquiry, it would be great to get an update on that inquiry and investigation. So if maybe Joe or Mary could tell us, that would be great.
Madam Chair, members of the commission, thank you. On July 21st, we received word that the Attorney General had opened an inquiry, which he characterized as an inquiry into whether or not there was an open meeting infraction. Through conversations Mary O'Grady and I had with counsel for the Attorney General's office, we believe that the scope of the review or the inquiry is related to both as to determine whether or not an open meeting law infraction occurred, and also whether or not a procurement infraction occurred. Even though we haven't been provided anything in writing from the Attorney General's office, other than some email that we have exchanged between counsel for the AG and Mary and I, we believe that the scope of the inquiry is limited to the procurement of the strategic telemetry contract. We've asked the Attorney General to define the scope of the inquiry as is typical in an open meeting law inquiry, so that the Commission can know what exactly the inquiry is about, and that we can adequately advise you. I'm trying to think. What specifically the Attorney General has asked for is he would like to interview the commissioners with respect to the open meeting law inquiry, and I believe the procurement inquiry too. Mary can correct me if I'm misstating any of this. We have, through our conversations with the Attorney General's office, we have told them that we needed to meet with you all to at least give you some legal advice with respect to what the open meeting law says, what the powers of the Attorney General are in this kind of situation, and the first opportunity to do that was today as an entire commission, which we felt was the most appropriate to proceed. In the last, I think the representative for the office expressed some frustration about not having already undertaken the interviews, and we again explained to him that we were trying to work with them as quickly as we could, but we felt it was necessary to advise the Commission. Again, this was July 21, it's now August 3rd. This is the first opportunity we've had to meet with you all. One issue that was raised with respect to the open meeting law, the Attorney General obviously has authority to conduct an open meeting law investigation. The relevant statute is 38-431.06. And through that process, he may he may administer oaths or affirmations to any person for testimony. In other words, he can interview you all under oath as he's trying to ascertain whether or not an infraction has in fact occurred. There's an issue that we've raised, and one that we wanted to talk with the Commission about, and that is legislative privilege, and whether or not the commissioners could invoke legislative privilege in response to an inquiry of this nature. We shared that with the Attorney General's office, that we are looking at that. Your predecessors, former colleagues, spent a good number of years in court litigating that exact question, and were ultimately successful in defining this body as a legislative body that enjoys legislative immunity and may invoke the legislative privilege with respect to legislative acts. And we know from the court decision from the Arizona Court of Appeals that that means legislative acts most certainly mean when you're engaged in the map drawing process. What we don't know is...
Mr. Canfield, are you giving us legal advice in a public session here?
Yes, I guess I am, and I'll pause there because let me ask if the Commission wishes to go into executive session to receive more advice from me. And
If you're planning to give us legal advice, I would propose that you do it in an executive session.
Let me just correct, Madam Chair, members of the Commission, I don't believe that I've crossed into the realm of legal advice. I was just trying to give you background before we actually get legal advice, but I'm glad you brought that up, Commissioner McNulty, because at some point we will need to advise you on how you may want to proceed as a commission and as individual commissioners. That obviously can be done. That would be attorney-client privileged advice. It could be done in executive session on a majority vote of the commission, or if the commission does not wish for that advice to be given in executive session, it could be done in open session. So I'll just finish my thought very quickly on and then we can talk if you want to go into executive session or not. And that is, I was just summarizing the legislative immunity doctrine that was adopted by the Court of Appeals as it applies to this commission. You're a legislative body. Your legislative acts are subject to legislative privilege, which means that you cannot be called upon to testify under oath in a legal proceeding, civil or criminal for that matter, with respect to your legislative acts. The question is whether it's a legislative act versus an administrative act. And at that point, I think I'll pause and seek more direction from the commission as to how you would like me to proceed.
Madam Chair?
Okay.
I'd like
Mr.
to
Herrera.
stress I welcome the AG's office, even though I really do think they're wasting taxpayer money. I think all the information is in executive session, whatever records they have access to, which I think are most records in executive session. Is that correct?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Herrera, it's under the open meeting law, they are entitled to review the executive session transcript, and we have provided that to them. I'll share with you, though, that we do have one concern, and that is that they are, at least in my opinion, they are entitled to review the executive session transcript, including attorney-client advice, because what they're looking for is they're trying to make sure that the commission, or any body for that matter, isn't using the attorney-client relationship to circumvent the open meeting law. But where we differ is whether they can use that information that they read and learn through their open meeting law inquiry for any other matter. And as we know, they have told us that they have two separate matters here. There's an open meeting law inquiry and there's a procurement inquiry. So that's something that we're trying to work through with them, because they certainly respect the attorney-client privilege and what it means, and they don't wish to infringe upon that. So that is one issue that we're going to have to work out, because one of the executive session meeting did involve, a portion of it did involve attorney-client advice. So.
Madam Chair,
Mr. Herrera.
Sure. I want to make sure that we keep as much of this part of the hearing public and not go into executive session unless we need to. I want to make sure that I stress that unless legal counsel recommends that we go into executive session. But before you do that, we are a legislative body, and the previous commission went through the whole process, debated it, and I think we should be treated as such. If the AG's office would not be able to do that for a particular legislator or a legislator, or whether it be a senator or a congressman, then we should be treated the same way. They should respect that we have legislative immunity, and I make sure that you, as our attorneys, that you help us with that, because I really do think that it is a waste of taxpayers' money. When people are, there's that perception that the people are, that if the commission or someone is leaning a certain way that they don't agree with, they file a complaint with the AG's office. Again, there's no proof of that. And it's just people complaining, and to me it's sad. It's sad that the people want to involve partisan politicians to waste the commission's time and the public's time. Because if it was the other way around and the AG's office was a partisan Democrat, we would be hearing from the other side, and they would be complaining and I hope that never happens for the Democrats, because I would be up in arms as well if a partisan AG was investigating a commission that they supposedly leans left or leans Democratic. And I hope you protect us. That's what you guys are getting paid for, and we do have legislative immunity, and I would hope that the AG's office respect that. So thank you.
Mr. Sturts, did you have a?
You did. Mr. Canfield, Ms. O'Grady, could you give me the three of the five members of this commission are not attorneys, and the two, I don't know whether or not they've got a clear understanding of what legislative privilege means. So if you could give us a little a thumbnail sketch of what that means, and then as a follow-up to that, what is the upside to accepting legislative privilege, and what is the downside to waiving it?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Sturts, again, we're happy to advise you. That's obviously what we're here for. And again, we can do it in executive session. We can do it in open session. It's up to you. I'll just say, part of what attorneys do is give advice, and the reason the attorney-client privilege exists is so that we can talk through all options, pros, cons, risks, benefits, candidly, and you can then weigh whether based on the advice we give you and how you wish to proceed, and give us direction. So that's, again, I'm not suggesting how you want to do it, and I recognize, we're talking about an open meeting law, an alleged open meeting law infraction, and here we're suggesting that we go back into executive session on attorney-client privilege. So the only thing I would add is that even the Attorney General understands attorney-client privilege. That's exactly what he's got. Hundreds of attorneys that do that every day with their boards and commissions and public officials. So it should not be, for fear of doing something of non-transparency, should not be the reason to not have executive session attorney-client advice. But we're fully prepared to do it either way. So it's completely at the discretion of the commission.
Well, Madam Chair, Mr. Canfield, Ms. O'Grady, I'm not suggesting that you give the commission any legal advice. I think what you're doing is you're delivering an analysis of what the legislative privilege means by definition and so that we would have an understanding of that, and so would the members of the general public. And then likewise, what the upside and downside would be of accepting or of denying that. That's not giving legal advice. That is purely giving an understanding of what it might be. And Ms. O'Grady may disagree with me, but at least the first piece you cannot.
Well, I probably should I'm doing all the talking here, Mary. You want to weigh in on this question of privilege?
Oh, I was just going to say that is legal advice in the context of a fact-specific inquiry, and that would be in the range of legal advice that is perfectly appropriate, as Joe said, for executive session. I haven't heard that motion to move into executive session yet, so that's why we are continuing with
Madam
this
Chair?
briefing.
Mr. Herrera.
Could you answer Commissioner Sturt's question in a very broad and general way? I mean, I think I agree with him that and I could be wrong. I've taken one law school class, and it's not, I don't know. So I would recommend, if you can, do it as generally speaking and as broad as you can, so we can have an understanding, and so can the public. So.
As to what legislative privilege is, which I think is a distinct question from the waiver issues, which would be legal advice.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Herrera, thank you. What I was going to suggest is we did a summary of legislative privilege for the commission as part of our legal briefing in the materials that we gave you, and I'm going to cue from the materials, and that information is also available to the public on the commission's website. So pretty much what I'm going to be saying here is directly from information that you all can have access to. Legislative immunity, it comes from the speech and debate clause of the U.S. Constitution that is also existed in the Arizona Constitution. And without boring you, the courts have basically held the precedent that applies to the U.S. speech and debate clause applies to the state. It also springs from the separation of powers doctrine, and what it essentially says is that it's a privilege that exists for legislators acting in a legislative capacity. And you are all, for all legal purposes, legislators. It's a testimonial and an evidentiary privilege, as we've know from the Court of Appeals decision. That means that if you are called in any kind of legal proceeding to testify through discovery or through a subpoena to testify at trial, you can invoke the privilege and you would not have to testify. And the same, it applies to evidentiary information, and that was one of the issues debated last time, which is whether or not communications between the commission and its consultant, the predecessor to strategic telemetry, fell under the scope of the legislative immunity doctrine. And the Court of Appeals eventually said, yes, they did, because it was part of the legislative map drawing process. The wording of, I'm just trying to find the court, I was going to read you right from the court decision. Okay, here's what just reading from the court decision, which I think states it very nicely. It doesn't extend the cloak to all things in any way related to the legislative process. Rather, the privilege extends to matters beyond pure speech or debate in the legislature only when such matters are an integral part of the deliberative and communicative processes relating to the proposed legislation or other matters placed within the jurisdiction of the legislature, and when necessary to prevent indirect impairment of such deliberations. It doesn't apply to political acts such as communicating with your constituents, and then it does not apply to the performance of what the court calls administrative tasks, which isn't defined in this case because that wasn't what was at issue. So I think I hope that gives you somewhat of a, and the issue here is under the Attorney General's open meeting law investigation authority, he, as I mentioned before, he can he can put people under oath, which is a discovery kind of process. It's a civil proceeding. It's not a criminal proceeding. And then the statute itself says that in that situation, a privilege can be invoked by who is ever, whether it's for attorney-client privilege or legislative privilege or any other privilege for that matter. So, Mary, do you want to add?
I was just going to add one thing on the purpose of the privilege and what the court said that Joe's been citing. The privilege is not intended to protect legislators' individual interests, but to support the rights of the people by enabling their representatives to execute the functions of their office without fear of prosecutions, civil or criminal. So that's sort of the context and the purpose that underlies the legislative privilege.
Madam Chair?
Mr. Sturts?
Ms. O'Grady, would you be so kind to repeat that last sentence, please? The purpose of.
The privilege is not intended to protect legislators' individual interests, but to support the rights of the people by enabling their representatives to execute the functions of their office without fear of prosecutions, civil or criminal. And as Joe said, it's an evidentiary privilege, both for testimony and for written documents.
Thank you.
Madam Chair?
Mr. Herrera?
One of the, and I think all of us signed up for this or got nominated and appointed because we wanted to do the right thing. We all care about Arizona, and one thing that we didn't want to do is as volunteers, we're not getting paid, is being persecuted by a partisan politician. And I think I would not recommend that you waive your legal immunity, your legislative immunity. I think we're all volunteers. We're trying to do the best we can, and when I volunteered, I was assured that we would have protection from partisan individuals, because I was told last time there was, obviously there were some issues, people disagreed with certain things. There's nothing like what it is going on here, meaning politicians getting involved, and it shouldn't be that way. It shouldn't be that way that we have politicians trying to intimidate individuals and trying to, basically intimidate. And I refuse to be intimidated, and I will refuse to be put under oath, because I have nothing to hide. What I said before, that everything was done in the open, as I mentioned to my attorney, and I mentioned to my attorney, Mary O'Grady, or our attorney, excuse me, that everything was done according to SPO, and so there's no reason for them to interview me, not at all, and I probably will not be interviewed. So then that's where I stand. I want to make sure that I'm protected as a volunteer of the state, and protect the members of the public that they care about this process, and they don't want to see partisans from either side of the party getting involved in trying to corrupt the system.
Madam Chair?
Ms. McNulty?
I think it's important that we discuss all of these things, but my concern is that we have about 2 hours worth of agenda items here that we haven't done yet, and you all need to be in Glendale in what, an hour and 45 minutes? The folks who are doing the Glendale hearing. And I would make a motion, I guess, that we go into executive session to hear your advice, but I don't think we have the time for that right now, and I think we should table this, look at our future meetings, set up another meeting, and then continue.
I would agree. Can I make a motion to table this discussion to a future agenda?
You can make that motion.
I'm not sure we need a motion, do we? We didn't do a motion the last item that we tabled. We just agreed we were going to put it on the agenda.
Withdraw my motion, and let's just table the agenda item.
I am concerned that we know when we're going to meet next so that we can, it looks like we've got half a day's worth of discussion here. We still have to approve our minutes and those things.
Other thoughts from other commissioners on this topic? Okay.
Madam Chair, members of the commission,
Sure.
before we leave the item, well, I guess on the next one item that we would like you to address, which I don't think should take very long, is agenda item 6. Sorry, I'm bad with Roman numerals, which is the discussion, legal advice, and possible action approving expenditures for council. I'm happy to brief you on why we asked for that item to be put on the agenda, if you'd like me to.
Okay, I would be happy to hear that. Others?
So the allotted time is, Madam Chair, the allotted time is 15
4:08.
minutes for the topic?
That's 4:10.
No, but it says 15 minutes.
Is that how long it'll take, Mr.
Can it take
Canfield?
less than that? So we can, because we definitely want to come up with dates for next meetings. I think that's equally, if not more important.
We could push. I'm sorry, even if it's suggested, we can.
It can wait? Okay. Let's, looking at the agenda. Okay, let's jump to discussion of future meetings, and we'll at least get that nailed down, and if we have time, we can do something else. But discussion of future meetings. So what is the situation for everyone's schedules? We've got, I know some folks going out of town, and yeah, Mr. Bladine has some.
I don't have everyone's current availability beyond like next week. Next week, I know that 2 of the commissioners are, one is gone all week, and another commissioner substantial parts. The weeks after that, I don't have any recent information on, and I was hoping that today people would have their calendars and we could do that. In talking to Mr. Strassma yesterday, it would be most likely, and I'm going to ask him to correct me if I'm wrong, that if we could do about 3 half-day meetings in a row following the preparation of the grid map, we would then be able to get into the process of making adjustments to it. That would also give him time between those half-day meetings to provide the information back to the commission that they would ask for. So I guess what I would ask you all to do is, if you can do it now, tell us when we might be able to do 3 meetings in a row. And if not, at least send it to me and I will try to coordinate something and send it back to you in terms of when we could do it. I think also that since it would take a week, we could be doing things as early as the following week around August 15th, if I remember correctly.
So is the week of the 8th completely out?
I would say yes, Mr. Sturts will be gone all of that week.
Can you
And
dial in or no?
It's very challenging.
Okay.
Where I am, it's
Okay.
very challenging.
Madam Chair?
Mr. Herrera?
I think we had, strategic telemetry asked for a week to complete the
Right,
grid map,
which
and
is
that would
the
put us
10th.
into next week. And we had talked about staying on course, so I would recommend that we meet at least to approve, either by telephonically, to approve the grid map. I don't want any more delays, and I understand people are out of town, but if people can make every effort to at least participate by phone, by Skype, because I want to approve the grid map next week.
Madam Chair?
Mr. Sturts?
I've noticed, Mr. Herrera, I'm all in favor of trying to move this thing through aggressively. I'd like the courtesy of the rest of the commissioners to recognize that I've notified Mr. Bladine a month ago that I was going to be off this upcoming week, and I think that something as paramount as this would be a disservice to me as a commissioner to not be able to participate. And I'd like your indulgence in being able to move that to the following Monday. My schedule, Mr. Bladine, going forward after that date is completely clear and manageable. I think that we've got a couple of things that we need to do between now and our next meeting. One is that we need to get map guide on computers in front of us. Second, we need to be trained either telephonically or in person. I'll make myself available to Mr. Strassma between now and Sunday to do so. The third is that we have that the grid map is made available through distribution, and Mr. Herrera could easily be distributed to the members of the commission a week from today or a week from tomorrow, so that we could have review of it and independent of notification to the public, so that when we came to the open meeting, that we could at least have our questions in place, rather than having what we did with the 3 consultants, or the 3 the online mapping service questions. I was caught off guard. We weren't able to make a decision today. So it would be nice to be able to have a couple of days worth of look at the map, so we could be adequately prepared to ask questions. And then drilling down, I'm a tremendous advocate of taking big tables and big screens and putting us all in work sessions. And as I suggested to Mr. Strassman before, an old planner's style of charrette, which is working together. It actually means to squat, which means everybody getting around the same place and drilling through and working through to get to the next level of information. There have been, there's a consideration right now of some addition of some public meetings taking place that is going to come into play. And then there's going to be the culling together of all of that data that's going to need to be done as well. So if the rest of the commission will indulge me and give us the opportunity for me to participate in this, I would truly appreciate it.
Mr. Sturts, does Saturday the 13th work at all, or no? The afternoon?
Madam Chair, Saturday the 13th, we are going to be in hearing in, Saturday the 13th. No, I'll be Sunday the 14th, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, the hearing is the 6th.
Right, I'm sorry,
So, okay, so that really doesn't buy us a lot, just the 14th on a Sunday. But I'm open to that if people want to meet on that Sunday. Are others available at that time? Just starting Sunday the 14th, moving forward?
Might be hard to get court reporter and
right.
that on a Sunday. I'd suggest we work on Monday.
Start on Monday.
So moving from the 15th on.
Madam Chair, I'm available the 15th. I'm not available the 16th, but I'm available the 17th, 18th, and 19th. It's Tuesday.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Mr.
When is the earliest we will be receiving the grid maps?
It would be a week from today, maybe, right? The 10th?
If we can say a week from tomorrow,
Okay, the 11th?
I'll be starting
Thursday, the 11th?
The 11th? And we would get it electronically, I'm assuming?
Yeah, that's okay to distribute electronically.
And we would then review it or make a decision on the following week? Just to make sure that I'm understanding correctly.
Right. Could we meet on that Monday, the 15th?
I am available.
Would everyone be?
Yes.
I'm available.
Madam Chair, if you need me, I am probably not available the 15th. I'm available beginning the 16th.
Are you available the 17th, 18th, the 19th?
Yes, I'm available anytime between the 16th and the 26th. That window is.
Okay, well, I would suggest we meet the 17th, 18th, 19th, 20th, 21st, 22nd, 23rd, 24th, 25th, and 26th.
Sure, why not?
Are you forming that in the form of a motion?
I hope no one seconds it. No, just kidding. We definitely need to be meeting a lot then, starting, okay, and the 16th, Mr. Freeman's out. 17th would be our first date where it sounded like everyone is available.
Madam Chair, I wonder if we should consider meeting on the 15th to finish our agenda here. We don't need Mr. Strassman to do that.
Good thought.
And then we could meet on the 17th, 18th, and 19th to begin our our mapping process.
Everybody
Does that
good
work?
with that? If we meet Monday the 15th, and we'll cover non-mapping agenda items.
Okay. Madam Chair?
Yes.
This would be an agenda item. Question for Mr. Bladeen. When will the schedule for round 2 be available?
Maybe we could add that to the agenda on the 15th, because I think we may want to have some input to that, given the concerns this last time, maybe.
I would think that'd be no problem. We pretty much have it together. We just need to modify it by what's happened and get that to you. So I would think we could be ready by the 15th easily.
Yeah, I had some thoughts about that too, that maybe we could talk about then.
Madam Chair, Mr. Bladeen, Commissioner McNulty, the goal would be to get it at an earlier date than the 15th so that we can have our comments ready and get them distributed to you so that we can actually turn that into an action item on the 15th.
Okay, you mean we would all submit our thoughts about hearings to Mr. Bladeen's, to one another so that we could
we'll try to get something so that that you're publishing something to us so that in a draft form so we can review it and give you our comments back prior to the 15th.
Which would mean we'd need to get something towards the end of next week to you so you'd have some time to review it for the Monday. I'm sure we can do that.
Right. Thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Bladine, just while I'm thinking about it, I have to go to a 3-day meeting, September 14, 15, and 16, which is a Wednesday, Thursday, Friday in September. Prior to that, I'm available every day. After that, I'll be available every day until Christmas or New Year or whenever we finish this.
That's going to be the easiest thing for me to record.
Okay. So we're going to meet the 15th, cover non-mapping agenda items. We'll have to figure out if that's Phoenix or Tucson or wherever.
Madam Chair, in the
Mr.
time,
Herrera?
did we agree on the time?
No, we haven't. So I'd prefer morning to start.
And I prefer Phoenix.
Okay. I've got a 4 p.m. meeting in Tucson that day, but if I could, if we started at, 9 a.m. in Phoenix, we could go till 2.
Well, where are we going to meet the 17th, 16th, 17th, 18th, and 19th?
We'll have to work on that and find a location where we can do that. And I'm going to anticipate until we get further along that those will be half-day meetings. Last time the commission did find a hotel with a conference room, and they used that 3 days in a row so that everything didn't have to be moved. I might take a look at that and bring that back to you on the 15th. That's not going to, I'm going to have to figure it out before the 15th.
Yeah.
So
And
I think I'll take a look at that unless there's an objection to see if we could find a location that we'd have to pay some costs, but so far we haven't had to pay much to you to do public hearings.
Mr. Strasma, does it matter whether we're near the Evans house? Do we need facilities of the Evans house for any of that?
No, we can. The software's on laptops and the projectors are portable. We can work wherever.
All right. As much as I'd like to be in Tucson, I think we probably need to either be in Phoenix or Casa Grande, halfway, or in Phoenix for those 3 days so that the Tucson people can get home from Casa Grande, or I guess I'm the only one that can work in my office, so that doesn't really help you guys up here.
We'll take a look first to see if we can do something in Casa Grande, and if not, at least in someplace off the freeway in Phoenix, so it'd be easy access for Tucson. But we'll take a look and see what we can find that's closer to Tucson.
Yeah, Casa Grande is a lot easier access than
Okay, we'll work
Phoenix
there.
does.
We'll see if we can't find
some way halfway. It's close to halfway.
Okay, we'll make that our goal, and if we can't, we'll tell you, but that's what we'll start with.
Okay.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
With respect to the meeting on the 15th, you have your meeting at 4. I just wanted you to know I've got a hearing at 3, which I believe I can appear telephonically at, so if we can schedule it early enough so that we can finish by 3, that'd be great.
Okay.
And
Pardon me, that was on the 15th?
15th, yes.
And Madam Chair?
Yes.
Depending on the time that we start and the location on the 17th, I just calendar checked, and I'm hosting a breakfast that finishes at 9 o'clock on Wednesday the 17th. So, and other than that, schedule is clear for the rest of the week.
Okay. So we're going to meet the 15th in Phoenix or Casa Grande, most likely, probably Phoenix, to cover non-mapping agenda items. And then looking at possibly 17, 18, 19, and then into the following week at dates for consecutive half-day meetings. Is that the idea? Is that what everybody thinks would work well?
I think that's our best guess right now, and
Okay.
we'll
have
try
to.
it.
Okay, and we'll definitely send anything to Ray that is, with regards to your schedule, that is immovable, so that he has that information and we can plan accordingly.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
In regards to both of these 3-day half sessions are going to be public sessions. I want to really encourage Mr. Bladine to find a location in Casa Grande because it's going to be really advantageous to the people in Tucson that want to be able to attend these meetings, and not just for the benefit of the three commissioners, but for the members of the general public.
So you're expressing a preference for Casa Grande?
Yes, please.
Okay. Okay. So we'll work on that. It's now 4:25 p.m. Is there anything else on meetings?
Madam Chair?
Yes, Mr. Herrera?
Can we make some time for public comments? I think there's people that hadn't spoken.
Yes,
I would like
I think
hear.
that's a good idea. We have a few requests to speak forms. Some of you I know have spoken on agenda items 3 and 4, but if you have general things to discuss, we can get through as many as we can. I think David can tell me, is he still here?
Madam Chair?
Yes.
I would prefer to hear from people that haven't spoken personally, because I think we want to end it at 4:30, as close to 4:30 as possible. So if people haven't spoken,
Okay.
Mr. can tell me.
I'm open to that. That's probably a good idea. Let me just see if there might be anybody that hasn't spoken yet. I think most have. Barbara Klein, is she here? Great. Okay, we'll go to public comment. Barbara Klein, President, League of Women Voters of Arizona, from Scottsdale. Oh, yeah. That's not good.
Thank you. I'll try to speak quickly here. The League has been very supportive of the Independent Redistricting Commission for a long, long time. We were part of writing it, and we do a lot of public education on it. As part of the Arizona Competitive Districts Coalition, we want to repeat that every effort was made to be inclusive, and we were successful at that. We were not only bipartisan, we were multi-partisan, and so were the judges in our contest. Our public mapping forums were held at coffee shops, organizational meetings like the League, and at Tea Party gatherings, and it was open to everyone. Regarding the cost of Azavia, I'm not certain why this should be held against the company or against the Arizona taxpayers for that matter. I hope it won't be. But all of the tools, any of the three, will be converted to meet the needs of the commission anyway. I also want to say that I think that already established participation, there's over 400 people that have signed on and kind of used it to some degree or another, and public familiarity with it is indeed something to consider and not to dismiss. More than the money, actually, this is important to us because we want to support the public tool that people are already aware of. Yesterday, co-chairs of that organization, Ken Clark was a Democrat and Roberta Voss, a Republican, held a press conference to announce the winners of the public mapping contest. And in passing, the maps were judged with coded names only, so no one ever knew who they were. We have prepared a report for each of the commissioners to explain the strengths and weaknesses of the maps they chose. We are not presenting these as suggested maps, but as a starting point for consideration for the public and discussion. And we have these for you now and also a few for the staff and consultant. I would also like to express some concerns of the League, that the public comments seem to be developing code words, at least in our ears. Competitiveness, if you get up here and you use the word competitive, it means progressive. If you get up here and use the words communities of interest, it means conservative. This is distressing to us. We believe that both of these issues can be addressed fairly. And while competition is not more important, it is of equal importance to everybody to have fair districts and fair elections. Communities of interest are very important. But we hope that the Commission will be sensitive to avoid manipulation by outside sources or those trying to gerrymander a district for their own outcomes and using communities of interest as a code word to do that. We really want you to look at both things and look at them strongly. And we will.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Bob Rosenberg. He's here? Oh, okay. Sorry, Bob. Next is Mohur Sidwa. Representing Self from Tucson, thank you.
I do agree with Barbara Klein here. She spoke very well, and although I keep banging the drum for competitive districts, it's just that in the 10 years ago, we found ourselves in somewhat non-competitive environments. As to what a competitive district is, I kind of mentioned that yesterday. It's one in which the ability to predict the outcome of an election is fairly low, and in which no party fails to field candidates on a regular basis. Another issue that came up was how do we deal with the no-party candidates or the independents? They are independents because sometimes they swing one way, sometimes the other, and you cannot define them. By their very nature, if they have chosen to be independent, they have chosen not to be defined in one category or the other, and we have to respect that. Although I have found, and because I've done a lot of walking on the streets, both in District 26 when I lived there and District 28 where I live now, those independents who tend to be in District 28 tend to lean definitely on the progressive side. Those who are independent in District 26, more often than not, tend to lean on the much more conservative side. It is granted anecdotal, but that's about as best an answer as I can give how to do it. But those districts, I gave you guys some graphs yesterday. Those districts where it's very close between Democrats and Republicans with a nice, healthy chunk of independents thrown in, those are the most competitive, because that means all ideas get an airing, so we can fight on the field of battle rather than up here. So that's all I had to say. Thank you all again for everything you do.
Thank you. There's just one last speaker that hasn't gotten to speak at all yet, Jerry Ottoboni from Rancho Vista HOA.
Jerry Ottoboni, it's G-E-R-I, and then O-T-T-O-B-O-N-I. And I had one particular thing I wanted to address, but then again, after listening to this lady speak, I wanted to address that as well. The first thing I wanted to say is I wanted to set the record straight about the amount of the money that was required for the commission to operate. Proposition 106 requires that the Arizona State Legislature give $6 million to the commission. But the last commission actually spent $9.55 million, so that the state is budgeting $10.2 million for the next 10 years. The budget of $3.5 million is for any 1 year, as Mr. Bladine has said. But the actual amount spent last time was $9.55, and that is public record. I know I sort of hobble around, but I tore a ligament. And so I walked probably 2 hours, 4 days a week in the last election. And I went to no parties, and I went to independents. And it's interesting, and I went to every house. And the interesting thing was, it isn't necessarily conservative in LA 26, because a lot of people became independent because they were unhappy with the Republican Party, and a lot of other people were unhappy with the Democratic Party. So this way, sometimes they'll vote either way. But I stopped at many Democrat liberal doorsteps and houses. So I have to somewhat disagree with the previous lady, because I've walked thousands and thousands and thousands. I walked all the way from Saddlebrook, all the way down through Oro Valley, all the way down to the street McGee turns into, I forget the name of it. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. That concludes public comment. I appreciate everyone filling out the request to speak forms and giving us your advice on agenda items 3 and 4 today, too. That was very helpful. The time is now 4:34 p.m. And without further ado, to get to our hearing in Glendale, I'll declare this meeting adjourned. Thank you.